Wow, what a year! I mean, it was just... what a year! I think we can all agree we've never quite had one like it, and I think I can agree I really need some Disney right now. Fairy tales, superheroes, cartoons, bring it on! This is the world I want to live in, man! Well, as you may have heard, even more has been going on. I mean, outside of all that. Disney has recently bought 20th Century Fox. So I guess this year the thing to add is the 20th Century Fox films, but not only are there more than I can probably do in a lifetime, but I don't know, something about seeing the Disneycember logo over Alien just doesn't feel right. So, the compromise is, I'm gonna do every 20th century movie that came out after Disney officially bought Fox. Yeah, I know Disney probably didn't have much impact in a lot of these movies that came out, there wasn't enough time, but I'm pretty sure they were under their ownership when they came out, so I think they count. But on top of that, I'm gonna be looking at the usual stuff too. Movies, TV shows, live action, animated, 2D, 3D, and now we can include 20th century into that collection as well. As I stated before, some of these you might have heard my opinion on already in other videos, but again, time has gone by. I want to see how I react to it when it isn't just right after the viewing. There are TV shows and movies that I change my mind on the more I think about them. So once again, we're gonna look at the good, the bad, the whatever this is, and see if any of them have changed over time. Because I don't know if you need it this year, but by God, I know I certainly need it. This is Disneycember 2020. You couldn't have gotten here soon enough. Let's talk about one of the first films that came out once Disney bought Fox, Spies in Disguise, and if you were like me, you saw the trailer to this and said, oh fuck no. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Will Smith, I love Tom Holland, I'm even open to 20th century doing animation, but a spy that turns into a pigeon? It sounds like one of those fake movies you'd see in real movies. You know, the ones you see a snippet of and go, ha ha, I'm sure glad that doesn't exist. Except it does, and I so wasn't looking forward to seeing it. So, I popped it in, took a watch, and actually had a pretty good time. I'm not even joking, this was actually a very delightful movie. I'm as shocked as you are. Will Smith plays Lance Sterling, a James Bond-style secret agent who's way too good and way too cocky. Though his skills are amazing, he takes them and the people around him for granted. Particularly a young gadgets expert named Walter, played by Tom Holland. His big thing is creating weapons that don't actually hurt anybody, which to the super violent Sterling doesn't mean much. In fact, he even fires him because he's just too sick of his goofy ideas. But all of that changes when Sterling is framed for a crime he didn't commit, and of course the only one to help him out is the one he treated the worst. He goes to Walter's house to actually steal some of his gadgets. I think that's pretty funny. I actually kind of like how much of a jerk he is. But Walter says he has a device that can make him practically invisible. That device naturally turns him into a pigeon. As annoyed as Sterling is, it does seem to technically work. He constantly escapes death by everyone around him not even being aware he was ever near it. Along the way, he's chased by another agent, played by Rashida Jones, befriended by some other birds that are so stupid they sometimes supply more trouble than help. And of course, they have to stop a supervillain that Sterling has a tie to, as well as form a friendship that has many ups and downs. Sounds very standard, even lame. Very, very lame. But similar to something like Lilo and Stitch or How to Train Your Dragon, it takes a very familiar premise, actually annoyingly familiar, and adds something kind of new to it. The animation is very funny. The action sequences are super energized and really imaginative. The acting is also pretty good. I mean, it's Will Smith and Tom Holland. They're very, very charming people. Their likable personas add a lot of comedy and heart. And I also really like the subplot of trying to come up with ideas that don't always need violence. Yeah, I know it's ironic, because there is a lot of violence in the movie, and it's funny, and in some ways it's very glorified. But it's not quite Pokemon the first movie. They don't learn that violence is bad and then instantly forget it by the end. It shows in a clever way not only the downsides of always using fighting as the only solution, but it also shows the pros and ingenuity of finding ways around it. Now, this clearly isn't the first time this idea has been tackled in kids media, but it's the first time in a while I've seen it focused on this much and this cleverly. The ways around not fighting are very imaginative, and perfect for animation. The way it ties into the villain's backstory is also very clever. I really like too that they don't have the other pigeons talk in this. That would have been such an easy cop-out, give them some goofy voices. Now that he's a pigeon, he can understand the other pigeons, but No, you have to imagine what they sound like. You have to guess what's being said to him whenever he has a strange reaction like, oh my god, was that really just said? It surprisingly made them more memorable and funny. On top of that, the slapstick is fast, the funny lines are fast, and when it needs to slow down, it can do that too. Everything feels the exact right speed. If I did have a problem, I'd say the villain is a little too stock. It's not bad, it's just not that interesting, with the exception of his backstory and how he connects to Sterling. But he just kind of looks like a typical spy villain. He says the typical spy villain lines and the typical spy villain lair, and yeah, we've seen all this. In a film that seems to be mocking the genre, wouldn't it be more fun if the villain was kind of part of that joke too? I actually feel like I would get more invested in his backstory if he was comical, if I was kind of having fun with him and then I found out this kind of tragedy that happened, but no, they just kind of play it for straight up drama and it's fine, I guess. I mean, god, if that's my biggest complaint about this movie, I truly am fortunate. So yeah, Spies in Disguise surprisingly works. Is it a big game changer? No. Would I watch it several times? Probably not. But if I was, say, with a family that had young kids and they were trying to figure out what to watch, I'd probably recommend this. It's not great, it's just likable. It's really, really likable. I don't know how they did it, but I do find myself saying, check it out. It's Star versus the Forces of Evil after shows like Adventure Time, Gravity Falls, Steven Universe. This is yet another one that throws its hat into the ring as one of those continuing stories that has, well, both simple and complex characters, basic and also detailed animation, episodic but also telling a grand tale, super goofy and also super serious. Yeah, it's hard to describe these type of shows, but you all know what I'm talking about. It was probably started with Adventure Time, and that style has grown insanely popular, still being done today. And if you know me, you know I really enjoy Adventure Time, Gravity Falls, Steven Universe, and so forth. So where does Star rank? Well, it's complicated. Like, really, really, really complicated. The show isn't like Avatar, where it's good all the way through, or like Game of Thrones, where it's mostly good and then has a bad ending. It's very much a Korra. It can't really be judged as a whole, it has to be judged season by season. So okay, let's try it. Season 1. Star is a princess from a magical world called Muni. Though her power is great, she's way too rambunctious. So she's sent to a parallel dimension known as Earth. They put her in a sort of foreign exchange student program, and she lives with a family who has a son named Marco, who's about her age. Marco, unsurprisingly, finds her ways very odd and bizarre, and she sometimes finds his ways very odd and bizarre, but the longer they're around each other, the more they form a strong friendship. But a creature from another dimension named Ludo constantly uses his monster minions to try and fight Star to get her magic wand. Not only do Star and Marco constantly defeat him, as he's actually not that threatening, but she uses her magic scissors to go dimension jumping to see all sorts of various worlds and characters and strange oddities. So okay, that's the basic premise, and I'll try not to go too much into spoilers here. I'll just sort of give an idea of what each season is like. The first season is funny, and that's honestly about it. I know what you're thinking, what's wrong with that? Funny is funny. Well, you can tell it's trying to be like these other shows, like DuckTales and Steven Universe and so forth, where they have this continuing mystery, but also these dramatic moments with the characters' arcs, and it almost feels like they just do the bare minimum with it. Largely because the majority of the season just takes place on Earth. And yeah, there's weird people and stuff, but for something like Adventure Time and Gravity Falls was really good at this world building, just sort of creating this environment and giving you an idea how these different places work. We mostly just follow Star and Marco going to school, he shows them stuff about the human world, and sometimes we go to a different dimension, but most of the problems are either just Ludo attacking or some sort of teenage problem that doesn't really add anything too new. The only episode I remember from this season where I was like, wow, that felt like something different, that felt like something from another world, is where she goes through puberty. It's Muni's form of puberty, and it's both over the top, completely insane, but kinda clever in the way it works in the changes and frustrations that kids go through. But also similar to how other creatures go through it. I don't know, it was just really, really smart and really abstract, and I thought there was a lot of layers to it. But the rest just felt like Power Rangers episodes with funny writing. The second season is where things start to get a lot better. There's a lot more exploring different worlds and different characters, and there's even kind of this different point of view that's being set up. Again, without giving away too much, there's this kind of force that's seen as an enemy, but the past history might show maybe they're not. But on top of that, there's another evil character who definitely seems like the enemy, and you're constantly trying to figure out what's he up to. Is he part of this misunderstanding, or is he really evil as well? How powerful is he? What's he trying to do? But you also begin the love triangle. Yeah, it has one of these. And it's honestly just The Office again. You know how it's going to end. You know what these characters are going to go through. You're just shouting, hurry it up! And they don't. They just take their sweet ass time with it. The irony is, I actually think some of the side characters they're going with might actually be better for them. I don't know, I was more interested in the mystery of how those relationships would progress, rather than the one I'm supposed to be invested in, which I already know how that's gonna end. But still, it feels like the show got its proper footing. Even the villain got a lot more engaging as he loses everything and has to start from scratch, and he forms this great relationship with this spider and this bird and even these rats, and you're kind of rooting for him. In the first season I was pretty annoyed by him, but by the second season, he became my favorite part. And then you have the third season, which makes some major changes, but are still really engaging changes. Now, instead of taking place mostly on Earth, it takes place mostly in Muni. This is so much better. We find out more about these weird creatures and this odd world and the history of this odd world. There's this imprisoned character named Eclipsa who I swear is probably the biggest mystery I've ever seen in a show. I had no idea if she was good or bad throughout the majority of the series. That's very rare for me. I usually figure that stuff out pretty quick, but they kept really playing both sides like either was plausible. Once again, the comedy is very funny, the drama is just getting more and more gut-wrenching and fascinating, but it also seems to be shifting focus. In the first two seasons, they're kind of building up like this one person is gonna be the big threat, the big villain, but then they're just kind of gone. Now it's something else that's supposed to be the main evil that I guess was hinted at a little bit, but I'm not sure this was all planned out from the beginning. And then we get the fourth and final season, which, yeah, I wanted to know what was gonna happen. I was invested, I mean, more than I was at the beginning, but kind of like Rise of Skywalker, it just didn't feel like this was where everything was supposed to go. The idea now is two worlds trying to be forced together and the problems that come from that. And I actually really like this idea. They were kind of talking about that in Korra and then they just kind of abandoned it, and I like that they really focus on it here. I also like that they don't frozen to it and just completely eradicate the consequences. No, the main character makes this big controversial choice at the end of the third season, and in the fourth season, she has to live with it. Everyone hates her. They don't see her as doing the right thing. They all call her a backstabber and a traitor, and it lasts for a really long time. I think you could argue it never fully goes away. But it's also the main focus of the entire season, these two worlds trying to get along, and I guess I won't reveal what the big evil thing is at the end that they have to fight, but when you see who the evil masterminds are, it's pretty underwhelming. Don't worry, they have their big battles and going to different worlds and trying various types of magic to do what's right, but it feels like so many other characters and plot threads and ideas that were being set up are just kind of abandoned. It has a good message and all, it's just kind of being done to death now. Breaking prejudice, seeing things from a different point of view, all that jazz. Yes, it's important, but I'm just not seeing anything that new being introduced here to teach the lesson better. I wasn't the biggest fan of Trolls World Tour, but man, the way they incorporated the lesson about prejudice and the different strings and music and so forth, that was creative, that was new, that was brilliant. Here it's the opposite. Everything kept my attention and I was entertained, it was just not going anywhere that exciting. At least definitely not what the other seasons were building up. It's like halfway through The Wizard of Oz if Dorothy just decided not to see the wizard and to see somebody else that could help. Well, okay, I didn't see that coming and I'm sure it'd be entertaining, but what's the point of even having the wizard then? So wow, yeah, that's a lot to take in. How do you sum up if that's good or bad, or if you recommend it, or what? I guess there's a lot more good than bad in it. With the exception of the romance, there's really nothing in it that I thought was awful. I wasn't going, oh my god, this is just the worst. They were more underwhelming elements. But when you compare them to the great elements, which there are several in this show, those slip-ups do kind of hurt in the long run. But I still say I did laugh a lot, I was engaged, I was properly invested and wanted to know what was going to happen next. I didn't want to not finish the show. I mean, I did want to know how it was all going to wrap up. So I guess the best way I can sum it up is, it's okay, with some really great moments thrown in. If you're alright sitting through a show that has a lot of ups and downs just to get to those great moments, I'd say it's worth it, check it out. If you're looking for something that works as a complete product, it's definitely not that. But truly, I don't know many shows that are like that. Maybe I've been spoiled with things like Adventure Time and Steven Universe and Gravity Falls. I mean, a lot of things do change in the making of a show. I feel like there's probably a lot of notes, a lot of people talking online, and the writers trying to rewrite things to please them, or maybe the studio heads were saying now it has to go this direction or whatever. I think the best elements are just so good, I want to see them in something that's more completed and more fully focused. But for what I got, I think it's good. If you really enjoy these surreal comedy shows that have an ongoing story with a little bit of drama, I'd say this is worth adding to the list. I'll admit, since I watched these on Disney Plus and didn't watch them as they came out, I don't really know what the response is to this show. Did you think it was great all the way through? Did it have a lot of ups and downs? Were you let down? Did you feel it came through? Let me know, as I legit don't know what the general reaction is. But from my standpoint, I'm glad I saw it, and I probably won't be forgetting about the adventures in Muni anytime soon. Well, some time has passed since my less than positive review of the remake of Mulan. And that begs the question, have I softened at all on the movie? Has it gotten better the more I let time pass? And the answer is, not really. When I did my first vlog review, I was so afraid people were gonna come after me because I knew that Mulan had this big fan base. I thought people were gonna be so pissed off that I didn't enjoy this, and much to my shock, most people agreed with me. Despite a lot of critics enjoying it, most Disney fans did not get into this. And I think part of the reason is, on paper, this is not a bad idea. This version of Mulan is pretty similar to the animated one in terms of the same beats. A giant army is attacking China, one male from every household must be drafted to fight them, an aging father of 2 daughters now, don't ask what the point of that is, I don't know either, is told he has to go, but his oldest daughter, Mulan, pretends to be a boy and joins instead. Through much training, she'll become a powerful warrior in comparison to the powerful warrior she already was. Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. And she'll figure out how to defeat this army while keeping her secret. Kinda, we'll get to that too. From the minute this film was announced, it had promise. They weren't gonna do songs, it wasn't gonna have comic relief, it was gonna be taken a lot more seriously. And honestly, that's kinda what I was looking for with the original Mulan. I like the original Mulan fine, but I kinda wanted this big, epic story on the level of, say, Lion King or Hunchback. But it played more like a comedy, which is fine, that's why we have films like this, to give a different point of view. The cinematography looked fantastic, the casting was great with Jet Li, Jason Scott Lee, and so many others. The director had pretty much done this story flawlessly before, so everything was set. But it's almost like Mickey's gloved hand put his paw on this film and said, Disney remake! And it fell victim to this checklist that now these awful films have to meet. The main character, if female, can have no flaws. This can be fine in other stories if it matches their journey, but that's not what Mulan's journey was about. She right off the bat has great chi, and even though they say chi a lot in this, I don't think they ever fully explain what it is, or if they do, they don't do that great a job. So rather than training with all the other soldiers to become this great warrior, she's already a great warrior, she can just become even better. In fact, the moral of the story is, don't hide that you're a girl. She was wrong for doing so. In fact, after the big avalanche scene, she isn't discovered that she's female, she just comes out and says it. Don't hide who you are, girl, you're strong! Okay, if she just went up to this army and said, I'm a girl, I want to join, they say no. Well, she'd have to be persistent and insist even more. Well, okay, then they just kill her. She had to hide in order for victory to happen, but that doesn't match our girl power quota? Well, too bad. Do you think a bunch of female spies shouted I can't lie anymore and got shot in the middle of war? No, there's times where you need to keep secrets. There's strength in revealing yourself at the right time. And newsflash, there's more than one female archetype. Mulan is the same as Belle, and Nala, and Cinderella, and Jasmine. Okay, Jasmine was done pretty good, but no, fuck that. I think that was the actress. I think she's what made that role good. This actress, whether it was producer notes or director notes, or maybe there just wasn't much there at all, is so stoic, she's beyond boring. I thought back to Rey in Force Awakens and how, yeah, she was kind of this perfect warrior too, but she was passionate, she was afraid, she was happy, she'd get angry, she'd get giddy. You connected with her very quickly. Same thing with Wonder Woman. She was literally molded to perfection. That is her origin story. Yet there's so many great scenes with her trying on the dresses, having ice cream for the first time, getting on that battlefield saying, no, I can't watch people die anymore. Good God, how inspiring. This character has the same reaction for everything. There's literally a scene where she says, I'd rather die, and I have no idea how she means that. Is she actually saying that like she wants to be executed, or just saying it as a figure of speech, like, no, please don't drop me from the army? I have no idea because the film is that bland. And the saddest irony of all of this is still probably one of the better Disney remakes. I mean, I'm not laughing at how bad it is. It's not turning villains into good guys for absolutely no reason. The dialogue isn't insultingly bad. Actually, I kind of like the scenes where they're training and they actually use some legit philosophies of battle. It looks nice, it has good atmosphere, and like I said, the initial idea of this isn't that bad. I was really hoping this would be the Disney remake that I would love. But no, they had to start off their main character as Superwoman because girl power. Okay, let me tell you something. We're not falling short of strong women. I don't know why you think we are, Disney, but we're not. There's tons of women and girls, both in reality and in fiction, that are doing amazing things. And they usually have amazing stories. What we are falling short of, at least from you, is the journey of the strong woman. You can say whatever inspiring buzzwords you want in Cinderella, but at the end of the day, the original tried to get out. She tried to save herself. She doesn't just twirl around in her bedroom, waiting for someone to do the work for her. Belle is not an ingenious inventor trying to change the world around her. She's just someone who did what she wanted and didn't conform to the norm. Nala isn't some goal-focused revolutionary who barely says hi to her best friend she thought was dead. She's someone who fled to get help and is shocked that a part of her past she thought was gone forever has returned. And Mulan wasn't fighting to be the ultimate warrior, she was fighting to save her father's life, despite her having no idea how to fight. That's part of what makes her character and the story so engaging. These are all elements every girl, every woman, everyone can identify with. And they are not being represented in these remakes, probably because you're afraid to show they have any flaws. These are stories that require the main characters to have flaws so they can overcome them. A lot of famous characters have them. Batman has them, Indiana Jones has them, Steven Universe has them. But when you're telling kids, wake up perfect like our female leads, which ironically feeds into that stereotype of the perfect woman I think you're trying to fight against, you're doing a disservice. I'm not gonna act like all these women are without problems, but most of them still have memorable journeys and personalities. This Mulan doesn't. I don't know, I feel like if these other Disney remakes hadn't come out, maybe I wouldn't be so hard on Mulan, maybe I'd just see it as an movie, honestly like several people do. But I've just seen so many characters that I've looked up to butchered by these live action versions in disguise of progress. And yeah, I just kinda get sick of it. I don't like Alice because she wore armor. I like her because she was inquisitive and kinda funny and reacted perfectly to what the story and world needed. This story and world needed the original Mulan, and instead, we got Anakin Skywalker with even less emotion. I didn't even think that was possible. But I also get people that just put these movies on because, hey, it's a way to distract kids for a little bit, and it's trying to tell a good message, girl power, yeah, you know, be tough, all that stuff, and I don't know, I guess kids aren't really gonna think that hard about what's being taught to them or the layers to it or anything like that. But why would you put this on when there is a story that does teach all of that? One that's not perfect, but has clearly made more of a connection than this remake ever will. I was hoping to do this review a little bit more calm and relaxed, but I think that Disney remake fatigue is just finally hitting me, and it already hit me pretty hard in the past. I guess I just felt like this would be the one. This is the one where everything was laid out. They were gonna get it right. It was practically made for you. And who knows, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe years later we'll see this as some sort of grand underrated masterpiece, or maybe this is what the director had in mind all along and Disney played so little a part in affecting it, but have you seen Whale Rider? Have you seen the journey that girl had to go through? I don't see any of that here. And if that's what you're searching for, pack up, go home, you're through. It's the little big movie that could, kinda, eventually. Pixar's Onward was not exactly a big hit at the box office, and some say it's the coronavirus, but nah, it started to tank even before theaters were closed down. So they quickly released it on Disney Plus, and a lot of people who saw it at their homes really enjoyed it. Some even said it was great. I can't go that far, but I think there are great moments in it. In fact, this is one of the rare movies that starts off, in my opinion, kinda bad and gets better and better as the film continues, and actually turns out a pretty good product. The story centers around a fantasy world, though I use that term very loosely, as this is a world where fantasy characters exist, like griffins and elves and fairies and such. But unlike most fantasy worlds where magic rules all, here technology rules all, and they kind of forget about magic. And yeah, I really like this idea. I think that's very clever. I feel like I've seen it done well in shows like Ugly New York, but then I've also seen it done bad in movies like Bright. This, at least at the beginning, starts off more on the bright side. See what I did there? Two elves named Ian and Barley, played by Tom Holland and Chris Pratt, try their best to live in a world where their father has died. Imagine a Disney film with a dead parent. Their mother, played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, tries her best to raise them, but she knows deep down they really do miss their dad. Well, it turns out Barley is really into this whole magic and sorcery thing. In fact, there's even a popular game around it. And no, it's not called magic. What a tie-in that would be! And he thinks he discovers a way to bring his father back. Unsure, but hopeful, Ian agrees to join him, and they use this magic scepter to try and conjure him back to life. But the spell only works halfway, and all they get is his legs. Yeah, he can't talk or write or anything like that. They're just stuck with a pair of legs. So naturally, they have to go on a journey to get the rest of their father back, by a short amount of time, of course, and they come across a bunch of colorful characters, of course. Because that's what these movies do. And at first, that's the vibe I got out of this movie. This is one of those movies that just kinda does what these kind of movies do. You see the big-eyed innocent who's a bit of a geek but still has a good heart. You see the mother who's trying to balance a million things. You have kind of the rockin' brother who's kind of a lunkhead but also has a good heart. And look, the dragon's a dog! What? We haven't seen that in... Well, yeah, we've seen that everywhere. Honestly, all of this I've seen everywhere. Which I wouldn't mind if the comedy or the world was more interesting. And look at it, it's just suburbia. I feel like there's a ton of things that could be done with this, a world that's half magic, half modern civilization, but no, it's mostly just modern civilization, and that's not that much fun. The comedy as well wasn't getting that many laughs out of me. Like, nothing was awful, but I don't recall really chuckling, and I know there were several moments where they were holding for like a pause where there was supposed to be a laugh, and I don't know, the screening I went to definitely didn't have that many laughs. But here's the thing, as soon as the quest gets started, it turns on. Suddenly, a lot of cool characters pop up, a lot of funny ideas pop up, and yeah, a lot of dramatic moments get all the more heartbreaking. They come across this group of biker fairies. I've never seen that before. They have to find this fierce warrior called the Manticore, but she turned her Cave of Doom into this Chuck E. Cheese location. That's really funny. The brother's obsession with the van gets a few chuckles. Even that pair of legs, you wouldn't think you can do too much with that, but yeah, they do get really, really creative. All of this builds up to a really good third act, and it so easily could have been botched. Without going into too much detail, the brothers have a fight, and it looks like they split up, and oh no, they're not gonna like each other anymore, and you think, oh god, this is gonna drag on and on. But it doesn't. They wrap it up very quickly, and it very cleverly ties into the moral of the story. But then there's this evil entity that suddenly comes out of nowhere, and I'm thinking, oh no, are they gonna throw in a villain when you don't need it? But then when you see it, it's really creative and really funny. I won't give it away here, but yeah, it's a good payoff. But the best part of all is the emotional resolution. This movie sticks the landing where Frozen 2 just crashed and burned. There are consequences to choices. They follow through with their sacrifices. A character doesn't give up something and then suddenly, oh no, just kidding, here's some magic dust made your dream come true or something. No, they give it up for good. That's why it's called a sacrifice. That's why it's emotional. That's why it means something. And the funny thing about it is the movie starts off sluggish and awkward and then gets kind of interesting and really ends on a high note. So what's really weird are the moments that are kind of in between there, the parts in the middle. Like for example, there's a scene where Barley is really opening up and being vulnerable, talking about like something that was kind of traumatic and really left this big scar on him, and it's a really powerful scene. But they do it while on a giant cheese puff. Usually I'm totally down for scenes that mix something that's really dramatic with something really silly, but this just didn't quite click. There's a couple scenes like that. They're not awful, they just don't quite click. There's always something that just feels off about it. But like I said, as the film continues, it really ends strong. It's kind of like the Frost Nixon interviews. A lot of them are kind of just blasé and not that interesting, but then suddenly it ends on a really, really powerful note. So yeah, I definitely recommend this film. I feel like people will either watch it and have a similar experience I did, and if you are, just stay with it. It gets really good. And if you're not like me, you'll probably just like it from beginning to end. Like I said, the opening is not really awful or anything, it just kind of felt a little generic to me, but there's a lot of people that still like seeing something that's bright and colorful and upbeat and has a little emotion to it. So yeah, I definitely say check it out. There's surprisingly a lot more to it than just Pixar's bright. Get behind the wheel and grab a wand. This is an adventure that pays off in the end. Because there aren't enough internet videos talking about this movie. The Rise of Skywalker, the third and final part in the sequel trilogy in the Star Wars, I don't even know what you'd call it now, almost double quintilogy with spin-offs. This film was not that well received by critics, not that well received by Star Wars fans, but surprisingly well received by the normal movie-going public, and that kind of fascinated me. When I first saw it to do the Nostalgia Critic review, I was kind of blown away by some of the choices they made. I just couldn't believe this was the direction everything was going. It seemed so made up at the last minute. I thought maybe if I gave it some time and let it sit for a bit, it would get better, but nah, this only got worse. The film begins with the dead speaking. Yeah, I will never get tired of that. As Kylo Ren discovers the Emperor is still alive, or is it a clone, and does he have an army of clones? I don't know, it's never really that explained. All that matters is Ian McDiarmid is back, and that's cool. He's honestly maybe my favorite character in all the Star Wars movies. Does he belong here? We'll get to that in a bit. It turns out he was Snoke and every voice that Kylo Ren's ever heard in his head, and he persuades him to take on, well, the galaxy, which he was kind of doing anyway. But now he'll be doing it for the First Order Empire 2.0. Who cares? Just take this giant army that'll mostly do nothing in the movie. And Rey, once again, has to build her strength and her army to take him on. Outside of that, without going into spoilers, I guess I can't say too much more. I mean, yeah, most people know all the twists and surprises in this, but honestly, it doesn't feel like it matters because everything just comes out of nowhere. The Emperor's the villain now? Okay. One of the characters is related to somebody else? Well, yeah, who isn't in this universe? Characters die and then come back while other characters betray their sides? Well, yeah, have you ever seen a Star Wars movie? Honestly, a lot of this repeating I would probably forgive if the movie would just take a goddamn breath. Almost nothing in this movie has a moment for somebody to accept something, to let something sink in. It just feels like a video game, going from one fight to another, discovering information, and then discovering more information, and then another fight, and then discovering more information, and then maybe somebody screams in anger. Or somebody dies and people bow their heads and then just on to the next fight or bit of information, or oh my god, I just didn't care by the end. Romances bloom even though they're never explored. Evil henchmen are built up even though they're never explored. New and old characters pop up and, you guessed it, they're never explored, so why should I care? I don't. There was very little to care about in this movie. Now of course the key word is little, meaning there were a couple things I did find a little interesting. Honestly, several of the ideas in this film I think have potential, and I think if you started off the trilogy with these ideas, maybe they could have worked. All the acting is good, especially Adam Driver. I feel like he's the one character that made it throughout these movies without getting scarred. Well, I mean, okay, he's scarred, but the character's still pretty cool. I like the way they worked in Leia, even though Carrie Fisher passed before the movie was made. True, you can kind of tell in certain areas, but this was a pretty difficult task, and I thought they handled it rather well. But aside from that, it just feels like every average run-of-the-mill sci-fi action film that isn't very good at keeping your interest. The only reason I would stay to finish is because I did enjoy the two films before it, and yeah, there's a timeless trilogy that came before that. The movie feels like the filmmakers just went into panic mode though, because Last Jedi was so divisive and so many people didn't like it. I mean, not just didn't like it, they despised it. They hated all the choices made, so they backtracked on a lot of stuff. Not to say there was a ton to go off of after that film. I mean, a lot of the directions that Force Awakens was building up was also kind of thrown in the garbage in Last Jedi. But at the core, they still had an interesting conflict, Rey and Kylo Ren. They were interesting, they had layers, one had a really complex past and the other had no past. Yet they still had this connection and a lot of things in common, but what they didn't have in common was gonna set them in war for the rest of their lives. If this movie just simplified itself and made it about Rey versus Kylo Ren, I think you could have something here. Would it change the minds of those who hated Last Jedi? No, but apparently neither did this. At least you could have an interesting story that dives into the psyche of the characters. But instead, we get side quests and treasure hunts and twists and surprises that aren't really big twists and surprises. But I'm not saying anything that new. You've heard what critics have to say, you've heard what Star Wars fans have to say, so why were there a lot of average movie fans that enjoyed it so much? The only thing I can guess is it gave what an occasional Star Wars fan is looking for. A lot of action, a lot of effects, a lot of callbacks, a lot of, oh, I remember that ship, oh, I remember that character, they're back, cool. Semi-complicated ideas with not exactly a straightforward good versus evil story, but you can still gather the bad guys wear black, the good guys wear white, but one or two of them have bits of gray so you can feel like this movie is deeper than it really is. And if that's what does it for you, awesome. I'm not so diehard a Star Wars fan that if you like this film, I'm gonna say you're a betrayal to like the whole trilogy, franchise, whatever the hell it even is now. All I can say is, it was very underwhelming for me. Even the people I talk to who like this movie don't really love it. They're just kinda glad to see the Star Wars-y stuff they like to see on the big screen again. They didn't really get much of that in the prequels, and even to some extent in Last Jedi. Slow conversation, ship mutinies, and casinos aren't exactly the big reasons people got into this. Whatever your thoughts, I think most people can agree this new sequel trilogy was very uneven. Which is expected, I suppose, but it's a shame nobody had one grand vision or grand idea. And yeah, I know even Lucas changed a lot of stuff, and that's fine, things can be changed, but there was some goal in mind. There was a finish line, just people had different ways of getting there. I think they were hoping talented artists would come in and take it in all new directions, which would be great. People wouldn't know where it was going because they handed it to different people, kinda like what they did with the original. But for all the different directors they had, it was still one person's vision. And this felt like a company's vision, which isn't always bad if you can hide it well, and I don't think this new trilogy did. Still, I'm glad I saw them. I'm glad I got these new characters that I thought were pretty cool. I'm glad I saw some good effects, some good performances, and yeah, some new ideas to a world I do enjoy. It didn't entirely work, and some parts drove me insane, but I was excited to see what they were going to do. I was excited to see these new characters. I was excited to see these old characters. I was even excited to see what they were going to keep and what they were going to change. Whether it works or not, I just find that stuff interesting. Is this the weakest of the new trilogy? In my opinion, yes. Is it a satisfying ending? I personally don't think so, but it is an ending, and Star Wars once again must find other creative galaxies to explore. seeing how I reviewed their movie a few years back, I think it's only fitting to look over the show Phineas and Ferb. For a while, whenever I went to a con, I would always see someone dressed up as one of these characters, usually Perry the Platypus. Everyone told me it was great, but I just didn't have time to watch it. Well, thanks to Disneycember, it finally allowed me a chance to sit down and watch all the episodes, and yep, everybody's totally right. This is a very funny, very clever, very formulaic, but surprisingly very engaging show. It's funny because I and a lot of other critics use the word formulaic usually in a negative sense, like we've seen this before, we don't want to see it again, but honestly formulas aren't always bad. Home Improvement always had the same formula, many of the Looney Tunes cartoons always had the same formula, and the reason they worked is because they kept the things we wanted to see over and over the same, and the things we want to see changed. Phineas and Ferb has a brilliant formula. It usually goes something like this. Phineas and Ferb are two little boys who are bored over the summer. Always looking for something to do, they use their genius minds to somehow kinda sorta get in trouble. And what I mean by that is, they do something amazing like go into space or make the world's largest roller coaster or all sorts of crazy things like that, but they never get caught. Particularly by their older sister Candace. Candace has an absolute obsession for getting them busted, but every single time she tries to drag her mom to see what they're doing, it's always somehow resolved, usually 1 second before the mother can turn her head to see it. But that's only half the story. Their pet platypus named Perry is actually a secret agent, always foiling the plans of Dr. Doofenshmirtz, who always wants to take over and or destroy the tri-state area. And just as the parents never see what Phineas and Ferb are up to, Phineas and Ferb never see what Perry is up to. But even on top of that, there's a ton of elements that repeat. Phineas's friend Isabella always helps out with the help of the Fireside Girls, kind of this Girl Scout troop. She always tries confessing her love for him, but Phineas never notices. Candace's kinda sorta boyfriend named Jeremy always somehow works his way into the situation and distracts her. Doofenshmirtz's usually dysfunctional family usually works their way into his plans. There's always a song, sometimes two, and they're always really, really good. I'm usually humming them every time I see them. I mean, this is like Animaniacs levels great songs. Even half the dialogue is always repeated. I swear, you can make a whole YouTube channel of all the supercuts of people saying various things. You could edit all the time Phineas says, "Where's Perry?" You could edit all the times Isabella says, "What you doing?" You could edit all the time Doofenshmirtz says, "Curse you, Perry the Platypus," or "Tri-State Area," or any device with the word "inator" in it. Yet somehow, through all this repeating, every episode is hilarious. There's a couple reasons for this. One is, the characters are very likable. All the kids in this are incredibly optimistic, upbeat, and have this joyful, naive innocence to them. There's one episode where they try to travel around the world. The bully makes a bet that Phineas and Ferb can't do it, and when they get to the end, it looks like they're not gonna make it, but the bully actually helps them out because he wants to see them succeed. He could just call off the bet, but no, it's about the journey, it's about the traveling, and he gets that, everybody gets that. It's just that kind of lust for a great experience these characters kinda have. Even the antagonists with Candace and Doofenshmirtz. Candace just wants justification for being in control of the situation, and if she can get the brothers caught, that means she succeeded, and of course she never succeeds. But she still loves her brothers, and the brothers love her, and they still look out for each other and help each other out when they're really in a bad spot. And Doofenshmirtz is both such a brilliant and yet pathetic villain that you can't help but feel sorry for him. Every time Perry tries to attack, he always has a trap ready, and it always works. It's just Perry always gets out of it. And his plans, kinda like Candace, often come back to just wanting control or appreciation, whether it's from society or his daughter or even sometimes Perry. Like I said before, where the show really shines is what they change up. The different adventures they go on are always really imaginative and really big and over the top. Doofenshmirtz's evil schemes are always hilarious, and the way they're always thwarted is funny as well. The formula is so good and the variations are so clever, you actually look forward to the different ways they're going to do the same thing. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but that's kinda how they make it work. The few times they don't do the formula and they have a different plot usually work as well. There's one episode where they jump to the future, and yeah, it kind of feels like fan fiction, but, you know, good fan fiction. Like the kind you kind of say, wouldn't it be cool if they made an episode out of that? Well, they did, and it's pretty good. There's another one where they actually recreate the first episode, but they do it as a musical. And it's literally beat for beat the same thing. Well, that has to be boring, right? That can't be fun, but by God, they make it work because they're somehow showing that they're gonna do the exact same thing, and somehow people are kind of remembering it being done before, but are kind of on board with it too, and then they try to change the things that happened before so they don't happen again, and they do it all in song, and oh God, this is so clever. There's even a Star Wars episode. Yeah, come on, we've seen these parodies over and over, but this one, again, actually adds kind of a different spin to it. It's the exact same story as Star Wars, with Luke and Han and Leia all doing the same thing, but there's kind of this side story going on with the Phineas and Ferb characters, and they're kind of helping them out on their trip without people even knowing. So in a funny way, you could say it's all canon. Well, kind of. Doofenshmirtz made a small version of the Death Star to crack walnuts, and the Empire just took a bigger take on it to blow up planets.
Thanks, Rogue One.
The only episode I can think of that wasn't awful, but wasn't that great either, was the Marvel crossover. I know, you'd think that'd be great, there's so many things you can do with this, but the Marvel characters mostly play everything straight except for an occasional weird line or weird action here and there, and I feel like they needed a lot more of that. I feel like they were probably trying to take it more seriously, which kind of took away from the comedy for me, and I don't know, the Star Wars one was a good homage while also mocking it, and this one just felt like, well, there's Phineas and Ferb fighting with the Marvel characters, have fun. And then there's this weird thing with Candace bonding with her brothers, and yet she's still gonna tell on them at the end, and I don't know, it didn't feel right. I know that kind of thing has happened in other shows, but they kind of worked with it better. This one, I don't know, it felt rushed somehow. But again, I'm being super nitpicky. The majority of these shows are incredibly funny, and the songs are incredibly hummable. And the characters are incredibly sweet, despite them living in a world that's very cynical and obviously plays on this predetermined fate that some of these characters are never gonna get what they want. So yeah, Phineas and Ferb sounds very goofy and formulaic, and it is, but that's part of what makes it so great. It goes all the way with it. And it works hard perfecting its dialogue, its ideas, its characters. I feel like this is the closest thing to a new Looney Tunes we've ever gotten, even when they've tried to create other new Looney Tunes. Yeah, they're just kind of doing the same thing. This is legit new formulas that can be played with, and a lot of great comedy can and has come from. People are still talking about it even to this day, and I don't blame them. It's just so well developed. Every single time I think to myself, this will be the episode where I'll be sick of the formula, I'll say enough. They always find a new twist or a new angle to make it feel fresh again. If you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, do it. Whether you're a little kid that wants to feel smart like an adult, or an adult that wants to have fun like a little kid, this is the perfect show to do both. Well, now that I've seen all of Phineas and Ferb the show, might as well review their latest movie, Candace Against the Universe. Interesting choice for main character this time around. It kinda like be putting Ferb in the main roles, just a little weird. But she did look hilarious as a stormtrooper, so maybe her and sci-fi will really mix. Apparently it's been a long time since this crew has gotten together and worked on a Phineas and Ferb project, so keep in mind I am watching this right after I finished watching the entire series. With that said, I think Candace Against the Universe is okay. It's by no means bad, but it's definitely not the best I've seen out of this crew either. They don't follow the traditional formula this time around, which is fine, they've changed things up like that before. But it doesn't quite feel as consistently funny as what I'm used to watching with Phineas and Ferb. But don't get the wrong idea, there are some really funny scenes in this movie. Candace is fed up that every single time Phineas and Ferb try to do something behind their parents' back, she tries to bust them and it never works. She feels she has maybe no place in the universe when suddenly, the universe answers. Aliens swoop down and abduct Candace, as well as Vanessa, Doofenshmirtz's daughter, and take them to visit their queen. Phineas, Ferb, and the gang see it happen and of course try to go save her. Seeing how Doofenshmirtz's daughter was also kidnapped, he decides to join along and they go into space to try and get them back. And of course Perry is kinda shoehorned in there because you need Perry, but he has to do all this without letting anyone know he's there, which, no, it's still Perry, he's always funny. When Candace gets to the alien planet, she discovers that she's the chosen one. She doesn't exactly know what that means, she's just so happy to finally have attention on her and obtain some sort of purpose for existing. But could there be more behind these aliens than they're letting on? Does Doofenshmirtz always end his inventions with an aider? I guess I won't go into spoilers, but there's not exactly a ton to spoil in it. You kinda know the aliens are up to something else, which is fine. It's not like story was the grandest thing with Phineas and Ferb. I mean, it was always kind of the same story. But the jokes are a lot more spaced out, and maybe that's because the characters are teamed up with different people this time. Doofenshmirtz's nemesis isn't really Perry as much as Isabella. Candace's focus isn't really as much on the brothers as much as these aliens, and I don't entirely know why Vanessa is there except to get Doofenshmirtz in the story somehow. And like I said before, the same can kinda be said for Perry. He has a few cool scenes, but he doesn't add that much. This becomes tricky because you have to know the show in order to watch this movie, and part of the humor of the show is these two stories are going on and they don't always interact off each other until they amazingly do, and then neither one of them is ever aware that they ever interacted. But again, it's a movie, it's changing things up, which is fine, but I feel like they've done other specials and even other movies where it seemed a lot bigger. It's been a lot more epic. There's been a lot more big changes and reveals, and maybe that's part of the problem. I feel like this series has already had several good finales. I mean, that 2D movie was great, the finale to the show was great. Even the longer specials I feel like could be a wrap-up to the show if they decided it to be. So the idea of doing a movie all these years later just focusing on Candace feeling inadequate is fine, I guess, but it's kind of hard not to compare it to those other really big projects that were super funny and had a much grander scale. I think if some of the additional characters were a lot funnier, maybe this would have balanced out a little bit more. Like the alien queen could be really funny. She's played by a really funny comedian, Ali Wong. And apart from a cute line here or there, she's not especially humorous or especially threatening. Even the master plan that the aliens have just kind of seems recycled from other master plans aliens have in other movies and shows. With that said though, there are still a lot of laughs in this movie that in my opinion make it all worth it. There's a great joke about what Candace's name sounds like to the aliens, which is later demonstrated over and over. The songs are once again really catchy and have some hilarious lyrics, and there's a joke about going double the speed of light that was so funny I dare not ruin it. Let's just say I was howling when I saw it. A part of me in a strange way almost feels like this movie would have done better if it was released on the big screen. I know that sounds weird because it's like, what, it's not as funny as the show, so why would you want a huger audience to see it? But I feel like the laughs are spaced out so much that anyone that wasn't familiar with the characters or this kind of humor would be given the proper space to laugh but also get involved in what the characters are going through. And with that said, the characters are still their likable selves. I mean, at the very end, when they have to kind of make amends, it's really sweet, like you would expect Phineas and Ferb and Candace to work out. Doofenshmirtz's rivalry with Isabella is out of nowhere, but it is still enjoyable. And of course, if you know the running jokes of the show, you're gonna get even more of the humor, where some newcomers might be a little lost. Full disclosure, when I saw the title of this, I thought maybe the idea was showing why the universe always works this way with this formula. Why do the boys never get caught? Why does Perry always win over Doofenshmirtz? Why do so many of these patterns repeat? I thought maybe they were gonna go to this alien world and find out it was all under their control, and I thought, man, that would really add some extra layers to this. But it just comes across as kind of a standard Disney Channel movie. But a Phineas and Ferb Disney Channel movie, I'm still down for seeing. They're still incredibly enjoyable, and even these writers, not necessarily on their A game, turn out some great laughs and character moments. So if you want to see Phineas and Ferb return in all their nostalgic glory, it's fine. If you're a diehard fan of the show, it's fine. If you're a newcomer who never heard of Phineas and Ferb, yeah, you guessed it, fine. Is it the epic movie a lot of fans were probably expecting? Not really, but it's still a fun little adventure. Take a look on Disney Plus and see for yourself.
What happened to you, X-Men? You used to be cool.
Dark Phoenix is the 10th and most likely last X-Men movie we're gonna see in a while. Not only was the movie a critical and audience disappointment, but it bombed something fierce at the box office. People joke since Disney just bought Fox around that time, they kinda weren't pushing it that hard because, we'll just work them into the MCU, and yeah, it feels like a good idea by now. But okay, to the film's credit, everybody was saying this was the worst X-Men movie by far ever made, and I don't think it's that bad. It's still bad, but X-Men Origins, man, come on. The film centers around the X-Men, I think in the 90s now, but don't get excited, it's not the 90s X-Men. I don't even know how all these characters apparently have gone through no growth spurt over the span of 20 to 30 years. Regardless, the X-Men are kind of like Adam West's Batman now. There's like a phone that the president uses whenever there's an emergency. They have their own plane they can use that now can go into space. I mean, okay, give them this. It really is kind of like a comic book movie. One of the big complaints of the early X-Men films is that they played it too safe, and no, this one's definitely going all out. But on one of their missions, saving some astronauts, this strange fiery entity goes into one of them. Can you imagine who? Yeah, it's Jean. It's always Jean because, yeah, this will be the one that gets Phoenix right, even though, wasn't there a Firebird in the last one? But this is somehow creating the Firebird now? What? I don't know, but when they get back, Jean is not exactly the same. Oh no, arguably the most boring character in all the movies is not the same. But don't worry, boring Cyclops is there to help her out. Formerly non-boring Mystique, but now boring because Jennifer Lawrence clearly wanted out of this role, tries talking to Jean because they're now suddenly best friends. But Jean can't control her powers or her mental stability, and she starts going nuts. She tries to find Magneto because I guess he's a powerful mutant who's also nuts, to try and search for a safe haven, but of course things keep going wrong and humans and mutants get in fights again, and I think even Magneto starts pointing out all the tired cliches in these movies. There's always a speech and nobody cares. But on top of that, this alien race is also looking for Jean. Oh, okay, at least we got aliens this time. Who I guess is supposed to be White Queen. I think? I don't care enough to look it up. And naturally, the alien force that possessed Jean is called the Phoenix. She's having trouble controlling it, and all sorts of destruction occurs because of it. Battles are fought, characters are killed, and I could really care less. While I liked X-Men First Class, I felt the characters that were the most interesting were Xavier, Mystique, and Magneto. And actually Beast too, he was pretty good. As the films continued though, they either killed off a lot of the X-Men that were I guess gonna be big players, but then focused on the old X-Men again with Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart and so forth. But then they're trying to build this group again with Nightcrawler and Quicksilver as a main character now, and oh yeah, he's taken out too. In all these movies, I never got why they felt they had to do Dark Phoenix. Not even Phoenix, they always had to jump right to Dark Phoenix. I guess because they feel it's a big story, it's aliens and fire and it's classic imagery and you can be really symbolic with someone dying and coming back to life and oh, beautiful, but you never got Jean right in any of these movies. I'll just say it too, Jean is not that interesting a character. She's the level-headed one that all the cool characters talk to when they're feeling bummed out. And that's good, you need that, but that's something that's established over time. The other movies didn't set her up in enough time, and these movies don't set her up in enough time. The idea is we're supposed to be shocked when someone that's so kind goes and kills all these people. But I don't know shit about this Jean, so why should I care? Same thing with Nightcrawler and Storm. Yeah, we saw them a bit in the previous film, but if you were to ask me what are they like in these movies, I don't know. They're just kind of there and do their things with their powers. I'm surprised Psylocke didn't come back. Remember, she gives this evil look at the end of the last one, and okay, that's not a thing. Like the Firebird's not a thing. These make no sense! But okay, for as empty as this movie is, I don't think it's god-awful. There's still some really neat scenes, there's still some really cool shots, and yeah, when they focus on the mutants I think are cool, like Xavier and Magneto, they still do the job pretty well. They still look badass, and yeah, I'm not gonna lie, there was something cool about seeing them get on the X uniforms, and they're bright yellow, and they're getting in this ship that can just go into space, and it's like, yeah, that's kind of what I liked about X-Men. They could just do crazy shit like this sometimes. It's like it was a comic book, and yeah, that was a little neat to see. But by the time you get to the end, you just don't care. It's like watching the end of Justice League. You can tell that they're trying to set it up like, ooh, wasn't that a massive thing you just saw? And you kind of shrug, not really. I'm probably gonna forget about it after I get some fast food on the drive home. Yeah, it's not a good movie, but I don't think it's embarrassingly bad. I feel like a lot of other X-Men movies have done things that were just like shameful and putting your fist in your mouth. Oh, how could they do that? This is so tired and not interesting, it couldn't even generate that much anger. And again, there were one or two good moments that I was like, alright, that was kinda neat. But they don't add up to much. Dark Phoenix isn't the worst, it's just bad. A bad note to end the X-Men movies on, but maybe a good note to start a resurgence. Well, I'll give this to Secret Society of Second-Born Royals. It made me realize something I'd never quite put together until now. When Disney does a story involving royalty, particularly a prince or a princess, if it's animated, it's probably gonna be good. If it's not animated though, it's probably gonna suck balls. Literally, the opening line shows how much Disney doesn't understand their own property. It starts off with the narrator saying, you know that story about a princess who's saved by a prince? This isn't that kind of story. Oh yeah, we're not doing that cliched genre, we're doing about 5 or 6 other cliched genres. In fact, even mocking this cliched genre is already becoming a cliched genre. Disney itself mocked how overused this is.
Do people assume all your problems got solved because a big strong man showed up?
Yes, what is up with that?
But don't worry, Disney fans, we're not doing that this time. Oh, let's just jump into this shit. The story centers around Princess Sam. Her sister is soon to become queen of... Honestly, I don't even remember if they say, and it doesn't really matter because Sam hates the matriarchy and constantly tries to protest against her. Oh, did I say protest? I mean start a rock band! Yeah, this is one part Lemonade Mouth. When both her sister and mother say stop trying to sabotage us, you little brat, and do something with your life, she discovers at her school, filled with other princes and princesses, because of course it is, that she has special powers. In fact, any second-born of royal blood just happens to have super abilities. Yeah, it's not evolution like X-Men. It's not even some radioactive shit like in every other comic book type thing. It just kinda exists. It exists because high schoolers and superpowers are a thing, so why not high schoolers, superpowers, and royalty? Oh, and you know, rock bands. Not enough check marks on our popularity list? Well, let's see what else we got. Sam doesn't want to be a princess. Yeah, that's a new twist. But when she discovers the power of friendship, she finds out more and more about the importance of listening. In fact, she discovers that her sister actually doesn't want to be as much of a matriarchy anymore as much as open things up to Parliament so the people have a say. Aw, all Sam had to do was listen. Yeah, you know what else would have helped if her sister fucking said that? Seriously, like half this movie is them fighting and the sister had to say one thing and there wouldn't be any more fighting. The evil bad guy that escapes out of jail and wants revenge, and here's another twist you haven't heard, has a connection to one of the main characters. But screw that, we gotta rock out with our best friend that used to be our worst enemy. This movie tries to combine every past popular Disney Channel movie into one. Which is ironic because those movies were already trying to combine a bunch of popular Disney Channel properties as well. You name it, this is Descendants, Princess Protection Program, Lemonade Mouth, Camp Rock, and a strange part of me could almost see it working if it had any sense of satire. If it just had even the tiniest understanding of humor, and it doesn't, man. And when it does, like when Sam's best friend has to be told what's going on and she says in one incredible run-on sentence the absurdity of this plot, the best friend doesn't even give that big a reaction. Because that would be funny and make sense. And I don't know if that's allowed in live-action Disney anymore. Even the properties they're ripping off they can't steal that well from. Like at the end they're told that they have a jet. Ooh, a jet for the secret society to fly around in. Aren't you thinking of like the X-Men jet or the Batplane, something like that? No, it's just a private jet. How fucking boring is that? There's not even a little logo on it or little missiles or anything. It's just a friggin' private plane. Who gives a shit? They can't even capture the cool elements of the cool things they're taking from. Alright, so is there anything good in this movie? Good's not the word. Let's say passable. The acting, for the most part, is passable. There's occasional exceptions with their narrator, mentor, teacher, who sometimes will just say lines like they're meant to be in a trailer. And Sam herself sometimes, especially near the end, will say these exposition-y lines that are said so bad, I kind of thought the idea was like she was being recorded and she was gonna play it back for everyone to hear, you know, purposefully acting bad, and no, it's just a real performance. But a lot of these actors are young, and honestly, I can see them going on to better stuff. And they're not really given material that can sound very natural. Everything is just so over-explained and not personal or realistic. It just doesn't sound like how real people would talk. So the fact that there was any charm from any of these actors, I think is quite an accomplishment. But no, this is bad. Really, really bad. At least in some of the bad Disney Channel movies like Lemonade Mouth, I could kinda laugh at how absurd it was, or, you know, Camp Rock and Camp Rock 2. They're just so stupid, I gotta laugh. And maybe that's because I do see some possibilities in this, with the actors and the production design, and yeah, none of it's great, but it's competent. I mean, you can tell a lot of money went into this. For the most part, there's a scene where a bunch of butterflies save Sam, and it's hideous, but I never got anyone on this movie wasn't trying, except for, the writers, who probably had a day to turn this script in because Disney's just like, hey, these things are still popular. This is just the most shallow of shallow. If they're not saying exposition, they're saying lessons. And if they're not saying lessons, they're saying buzzwords. And if they're not saying buzzwords, they're referencing something that's popular at the moment. In fact, just call it that, the secret society of references. If I haven't made myself clear, skip this piece of shit. Seeing how there's sadly more unfunny Adam Sandler movies than there are funny Adam Sandler movies, is it possible Disney could help him out? That's a hard no. Bedtime Stories not only stars Adam Sandler, but it's also produced by his company, Happy Madison. It's a combo made in sadness. And it's exactly what you would think a Disney/Happy Madison production would give us, something that's much more Happy Madison and much less Disney. I don't know what it is. I feel like that production company just takes over everything. It's always the majority. I don't know if whoever they're compromising with just shrugs and says, okay, we'll take a chance, maybe it'll work, give them most of the control. Or if what Happy Madison brings to the table is just so bad, it overshadows any positive moments. But to Happy Madison's credit, they've done a lot worse. Adam Sandler plays the son of a motel owner, played by Jonathan Pryce. He sadly is not a good businessman, so he hands over control to someone else. Over the years, it becomes much bigger and far more successful, and Sandler stays on as the custodian. But wouldn't you know it, a big bad businessman wants to take the motel in a direction Sandler doesn't like, closing down the current one to make room for another one that's, coincidentally, also gonna destroy his sister's school. Wow, that's two heart-tugging places that are gonna close unless our goofy hero can do something about it. Well, Sandler of course has ideas about how to fix everything, but nobody listens to him. That is, except for a little bit of time he's stuck looking after his sister's kids, and to put him to sleep every night he makes up a bedtime story. He's not exactly the best at it, so the kids help out, and magically-ish, elements of the story come true the next day. At first, it looks like magic, but then it's revealed it's usually just coincidences. Regardless though, whenever he tells a story to the kids and the kids help out, something very similar always happens the following day. So he tries to use this to his advantage, trying to get in good with the man who owns the place to give him a chance, and if the kids suddenly decide he should be set on fire, trying to avoid that if he can as well. The tragedy of this movie is, it's not a bad idea. I'll even go out on a limb and say, it's not a bad idea for Adam Sandler. I thought the same thing for Click. It's really smart, it's really clever, and you can actually go in a lot of interesting directions. But, much like that movie too, it doesn't really utilize the talent that it has. Adam Sandler can be very funny, he can be very clever. Yes, it can be immature, but there's still an intelligence to that immaturity sometimes. I can't explain it. It worked in Happy Gilmore, it worked in The Wedding Singer and Zohan. It's possible. But the writing just gets lazy. The biggest running joke in the movie is they have a guinea pig that has these big bulgy eyes that are fake as hell. But they act like they have a gold mine and this will be the mascot of the film, so they show him over and over and over. If you ever laughed at this thing, trust me, by the end, you won't be. You'll be sick to death of him. The film also has all the trademarks that you'd expect in a Happy Madison production. There's always a bad guy who's not funny and doesn't get the joke. There's always a girlfriend who's forgettable as hell. There's always an awkward sidekick who's never given any funny lines to say. And there's always Rob Schneider insulting some sort of ethnicity. What is it this time? Native American, right on cue. I will say this, in a really bad Happy Madison production, it's usually unbearable. The bad writing, gross out jokes, I guess attempt at shock humor, these movies have some of the worst. But here, they're just kinda lame. Every once in a while I might rub my temple when something really doesn't work, but for the most part if a joke bombs, they just kinda move on to the next one, they don't hold on it too long. So I guess there's that. The only times I got a good chuckle is when it went extremely surreal. A lot of those center around the children's additions to the story that make no sense but are imaginative. For example, in one of the scenes he has a red horse. I have no idea why, but look at that thing. It's kinda cool. I've never seen a red horse. It's really neat. I don't know why. Looking at that just brings a smile to my face. I also like weird little additions, like when a group of friends is so jealous and they don't know what to do, the little girl says they do the hokey pokey. No rhyme or reason, it's just what they do. I even kind of giggled when they did in real life, like they have no idea why they're doing it, they feel like they're possessed. Once in a while you get something cute like that, but it's mostly just misses. Not painful misses, but still misses. There's of course the third act moping period where the good guy has to feel really bad and he screwed up or nobody trusts him anymore and then he has to find the confidence to do something really wacky to save the day, but the big bad businessman won't listen and tries to stop him. Yeah, I mean, you know the drill. Like I said, I've seen far worse versions of this formula, but it's still a bad formula. Every once in a while Adam Sandler can work with it okay, but this isn't one of them. I always feel bad hating on his movies because everybody always says he's the nicest guy, he's so sweet and kind and talented, and I believe them. I just don't understand why those wonderful elements are so rarely utilized on film. I guess you could argue without movies like these, you wouldn't have ones like Uncut Gems and Punch Drunk Love. You know, like in order for Favreau to make Mandalorian, he has to do a few Lion Kings. Are they worth it? I guess. But that still doesn't make them very good stories. For a while I've had people asking me to talk about these new Mickey Mouse shorts. I'm not even really sure what to call them. On YouTube they're just called a Mickey Mouse cartoon. On Wikipedia it's just Mickey Mouse. I mean, how do we tell the difference? There's clearly a difference between this and the old Mickey Mouse cartoons. I mean, I don't know, I guess we didn't tell the difference between the black and white ones and the color one, but maybe that is the difference, the black and white and the color one. Anyway, these are very different from any Mickey Mouse cartoon you've ever seen, but certainly have familiar elements. The design, for the most part, goes back to the original Mickey Mouse drawings. Dotted eyes, very flat and stringy. The stories have a very similar feel too, very simple, like Mickey and Minnie going on a date and he tries to get her a hot dog, but the hot dog slips so he has to go get it and leads to this long, goofy adventure. Everything else though is kinda like a mix between Ren and Stimpy and the Powerpuff Girls. The expressions, the energy, the speed, the detail, the sudden lack of detail. You don't really know what's around the corner and it's almost always insane. I'll admit when I first saw a few clips of this on YouTube, I was intrigued but not incredibly sucked in, mostly because I've never been a huge Mickey Mouse fan. I mean, of course I liked him as a child, what little kid didn't, but as I got older I found his cartoons to be very safe and boring. Donald Duck, Goofy, Chip and Dale, I can still watch those fine, but Mickey was always so bland. And for years, that's pretty much how he stayed, despite many attempts of writers and animators trying to make him interesting, but he's just too popular a brand to take any risks on. He always has to be happy, because happy is friendly, and even if he's mad or sad, it's usually a very relatable situation and he never gets too out of control, or violent, or extreme, or anything like that. I guess I like that such a friendly persona was admired and looked up to, but he was just never that interesting a character. Well man, they go off script here because this mouse is bonkers half the time. His facial expressions alone almost look like a psychotic killer. Sometimes he even does stuff that a psychotic killer might do. But for the most part, it still seems just enough Mickey Mouse. Most episodes start off with him in a really happy mood, everything's going his way until some sort of predicament happens, and his extreme reactions usually come from extreme situations. It's kind of like when you see Kermit the Frog crack. He doesn't do it often, but when he does, you get it, it's relatable. The only real difference is Mickey goes a lot bigger with his reactions and does it a lot more often. But again, the situations usually justify it. I'm honestly shocked Disney allowed this icon to go so crazy and violent and over the top and screaming and yelling. But maybe that's why they did such a different look for him. I mean, yes, like I said, this is clearly a send-up to the early Mickey Mouse cartoons, but you look at this and you wouldn't confuse it for an old Mickey Mouse cartoon. It clearly has more modern animation and timing. With that said, the updates are very funny. Remember how I was talking about he loses a hot dog and he chases after it? That's kind of something you'd see in an original Mickey Mouse cartoon. Well, in that cartoon, he'd usually just try to get it and keep slipping away. But here, the hot dog does that at first, but then it keeps moving on its own and it grows a consciousness to a point where it starts going off gambling on the street, stealing people's purses. It's insane. The shorts are very good at creating this incredible high energy and just riding it as far as they're allowed to go. Honestly, my only complaint is I wish they could go even further. Not the animation or the goofy ideas or anything like that, I am actually talking about the characters. Someone like Goofy works great in this. He doesn't catch on to stuff. Sometimes he can be selfish without even realizing he's being selfish, so that works in this high energy world. Sometimes the same can be said for Donald. But the other main characters like Mickey and Minnie and Daisy do get to go a lot further than they've ever gone before, but there's a part of me that sees this as a brilliant cartoon if they could just go all the way mean. Which I know they can't. I guess what pops in my head is something like Eek the Cat. He's such this incredibly kind character and always wants to help people, and then the most awful things happen to him. The world is always out to get him and it leads to terrible circumstances, but Eek is still jolly and happy and acts like it's not a big deal, even when it is. This Mickey is very close to that, but I don't think the world is quite mean enough in order for it to work brilliantly, and Mickey is not quite nice enough for it to work brilliantly, so they kinda give half and half. The world is a little mean and sometimes Mickey's a little mean. But again, it's impressive we get that from a Mickey Mouse cartoon at all, and with such energy and creativity and spontaneity. I only bring that up because I think that's the only thing stopping me from loving it. I was watching these and really laughing and having a good time, but I kept scratching my head saying, why aren't I in love with this? Why aren't I treasuring this? There's clearly so much talent behind this, and they're working with something that's very difficult to work with. And for me anyway, it's because they couldn't go all the way cruel on one end, whether it's on Mickey's part or the world's part or both. But that really is kind of a nitpick, as again, you're talking to a guy who never really got into Mickey Mouse cartoons, and for me to really be laughing and excited about what was coming next is very rare for these. I really enjoyed the look of this show. At first it took a little time to get used to, but soon I really warmed up to it. I love both the detail and the simplicity in the backgrounds. I love how they can look very flat, but if you look at how the colors sometimes leave the lines and just the little tiny touches everywhere, they're really well done. A lot of kid shows nowadays are starting to look the same. If you were to play the first minute or so of a random show without showing any of the main characters, I don't know if I could point out what show it is. This one I could get right away, even if you never show Mickey, Donald, Goofy, any of them. I also enjoy that not only does it sometimes take place in other countries, like Italy, France, or whatever, but the characters will speak the language. If they're in France, Mickey will speak French. If they're in Italy, he'll speak Italian. And it's just funny hearing these incredibly familiar voices speak a different language, while at the same time, maybe teaching your kids a few new words. I like that they're allowed to mix up the continuity like that too. It's not that Mickey and Minnie are always a couple. Sometimes you see them meet, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. There's one episode where Goofy's just a zombie, and by God, he's kind of a terrifying zombie. Again, I was really impressed Disney was allowing this kind of imagery for some of their biggest characters. And apparently, I'm not alone. Last I looked, one of these collections had something like 68 million views. I think they even have a ride at the Disney parks now. I guess that classifies them as a big hit. And you can totally see why. These shorts are imaginative, high energy, innocent and upbeat, but with an incredibly cynical edge. And both kids and adults can watch and enjoy it. If you're like me and you saw a fast little clip here or there and you didn't know what to make of it, give it a chance. It might be one of the few times Mickey Mouse actually made you laugh. That was bad. Artemis Fowl! This is one of those films that was going to be released on the big screen, but then the pandemic happened and they released it on Disney+. Boy, did they dodge a bullet, cause man, oh man, I actually kind of feel bad for this movie. It has a great cast around it. Apparently the book series is really popular. It has a wonderful director. And you know, it's Disney. They've done stuff like this before. They should be pretty good at it. But critics just ripped this movie apart, and I gotta say, they're right. Every time I try to give it a chance or look at it like maybe it's good from this point of view, no, they always botch it up somehow. It's honestly a little intriguing. Alright, so the story, which is very difficult to tell because there's somehow too much of it and none of it at the same time, centers around a boy named Artemis. He has a father named Artemis, well that won't be confusing, and they're looking for a device called the Oculus. Artemis and Artemis are looking for the Oculus. You starting to see the problem here? Artemis's father tells him stories about fairies and trolls and goblins, and naturally he thinks it's all fairy tales. But one day his father goes missing, presumably dead, and all of a sudden all the news media is reporting that he's this big-time thief, stealing all these priceless artifacts. How did they discover this just a day or two after he disappeared? Oh, there's way too much other stuff to talk about to focus on little things like reason. Artemis's butler shows him this world that, of course, he never knew existed, but was under his nose the whole time. All the talks of fairy tale creatures are true, and it looks like one of them, the fairies, who are little people dressed in green, have pointy ears and funny voices, and spend most of their time in Ireland. I don't know why they're not leprechauns either, are also looking for the Oculus, which is just something really powerful that everybody wants. It's still a little vague what it does. And it looks like Artemis's father has been kidnapped, and the kidnapper tells Artemis if he ever wants to see Artemis again, he'll hand over the Oculus. So the fairies talk to Artemis about getting Artemis by getting the Oculus. That is to say, Artemis kidnaps one of the fairies and holds her in his house, causing the other fairies to put a time freeze over the house and try to break in to get her back. Their plan is to use a tall dwarf played by Josh Gad, whose special powers are shitty CG and I think shitting CG. Is he farting that dirt out? But Artemis is so clever at finding Artemis that Artemis lets the dwarf find the Oculus. Once the fairy and the dwarf see that Artemis has the Oculus, Artemis uses the Oculus to find Artemis, while the fairies are being taken over by other fairies who take away the fairy's magic inside so that when the butler is dying she can't save him, but the fairies fight the fairies, giving the fairy her magic back, giving the butler his life back, helping Artemis use the Oculus to get Artemis back. And if you had a hard time following that, I can actually sum this movie up in one sentence. It's Harry Potter characters in Home Alone. Yeah, if you saw the trailer and you saw like magical creatures trying to get in the house and you think, oh, that'll be like in the first third or something. No, that's the entire movie. Don't get me wrong, we do see other locations, but it's mostly talking about how they're gonna break into this house. Even the guy telling the story is just talking about the grand adventure of just trying to get into this one house. This was a book? Even Home Alone saved that for the last third. It wasn't the entire movie. I mean, okay, it was Home Alone 3, but okay, it's Home Alone 3 with Harry Potter characters. Yet somehow there's so much exposition, so much explaining, so much backstory that they're trying to make it seem like this gigantic deal. But it's just Jupiter Ascending for kids. Way too much talking, not enough doing. And when they actually do stuff, it looks terrible. I mean, look at these effects. These are pathetic. They're not that much different from that troll in the first Harry Potter movie, and that's like years and years old. This is the guy who directed Thor? So, alright, you're probably wondering, what's to feel bad about in this movie? Well, everything feels like it's close to being something. Like Josh Gad telling the story. He has this really unique voice. Honestly, I don't think I would recognize him if I didn't see him. But he kind of goes in and out of it. Like you kind of want to say, oh, we should do a take two. Like you tell Christian Bale, hey, we should do a take two on that Batman voice, but they didn't for some reason. Same thing with Judi Dench. Sometimes she seems kind of interesting and her voice seems kind of badass, but other times it's just laughably ridiculous. Even the main character, Artemis Fowl, I kind of thought at first, oh, this is going to be a pretty good performance because he seemed very reserved and kind of like this super genius. And I thought it was going to be like The Social Network where he was very calculating and kept everything inside and didn't show much emotion. But nope, there's several times where he's supposed to be afraid or happy or angry and, again, really needed some take twos. It feels too chopped up and kind of like Dolittle where there's a lot of scenes where someone's not on screen but you hear them talking and you know it was just dubbed in later. Like they needed to make stuff more clear because it wasn't obvious enough, and that's very fair. There's too much going on and somehow nothing going on at the same time, so it is kind of hard to know what's important and what isn't. The only thing that came out of this unscathed is the girl playing the fairy. This actress does a really good job. I kind of wish this was her story and we were just following her throughout the whole thing. But nope, it's this overly detailed epic story about leprechaun fairies trying to break into this Men in Black kid's house. They even have deneuralizers in this. Yeah, they even use it on the eyes. God, is anything in this original? And as you'd imagine, it just doesn't work. It's definitely an intriguing bad, but it's not a so bad it's good kind of movie either. It's mostly just hard to follow, pretty dull, and surprisingly not all that imaginative. I feel like I've seen this kind of thing a million times. Honestly, it kind of looks and feels like a Percy Jackson sequel. And it is a shame. There's a lot of good people involved in this, and even some of the newcomers I'd love to see go on to other stuff. But if this is really the most epic thing they could put together, then Fowl is definitely the right title for this flick. Well, that was unfortunate. New Mutants is the attempt to be, I guess, a new kind of X-Men spin-off? Except it's not really an action series anymore, it's a horror series? And they just kind of stay in this hospital and the biggest named mutant is Ileana? Like, Colossus' sister Ileana? Oh man, I did not have high hopes for this, and after seeing all the critical reviews that came out and it being a box office failure, I mean, yeah, it was during COVID and everything, but the development purgatory / development hell it's been in, being pushed back and rewritten and changed and then just kinda shoved out and saying, please enjoy, please, ? With all of that, the biggest tragedy is, it almost works. I mean, hear me out. It does not come through at the end, and even in the first half, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense, but I will admit, I was buying this idea more than I thought I would at the beginning. A young mutant named Danny loses her father and everyone she knows in a supposed tornado. A tornado that growls, but we'll get to that in a bit. Suspected she might have something to do with this occurrence, she's put in this mental ward. With only one doctor and a few other patients. Yeah, nobody questions something else might be going on here. These other mutants, naturally, have very tragic backstories and very unique powers, and they learn from each other what they are, and... Wow, is that it? Did I actually sum it up that fast? Huh, I guess I did. And to the casual listener, you might think, God, that sounds unbelievably boring. I mean, that's it? It's just a bunch of young mutants in a mental ward talking to each other? Well, if you're looking for an X-Men movie, sure, and yeah, they do have little name drops here and there and some footage from Logan, which is like, what? I'm still not sure how that connected. There are some kind of supernatural things going on in the hospital that they think might be demons, which you live in a world with mutant powers. Hello, you know they're not going to be demons. What I'm getting at is, when it is just the mutants and this one doctor, it's kinda like a twisted breakfast club, and I mean that in the best way. All the characters in this are surprisingly memorable, and maybe that's because there's not a ton of other mutants or a ton of other missions they gotta go on or anything. It's just them talking about their past and how they feel about stuff, and yeah, what could be going on in this mental ward, which, okay, is a little obvious, but I kind of like these stories where there's a looming threat over you and you're not entirely sure what it is and it slowly reveals itself in bits and pieces. In movies that star angsty teenagers, I usually have to struggle to remember them or which one had what personality. Sometimes they even look alike. I really don't have the best memory with them. But I think because the casting, the performances, and the direction was so good, I had no trouble remembering who does what their backstories are, how they feel about the other characters, and surprisingly have good chemistry. I guess that makes sense. A lot of these actors have been in material that demands really good performances, like Stranger Things, Game of Thrones, Queen's Gambit. And I kind of respected they didn't have to go from place to fight evil. I mean, yeah, I know that's what I'm looking for in an X-Men movie, but this is something a little different. And if you're gonna win me over with something that's really different, win me over with it. Go all the way in, and for the most part, it does for a while. Sure, sometimes it's a little choppy and there are plot holes that don't add up, but if you stopped the movie halfway through and asked me if I wanted to finish it, I would say yes. I wanted to know what was gonna happen to these characters. But sadly, the movie does continue and there has to be some payoff to what the supernatural stuff happening around them is. I don't think I'm spoiling anything when I mention mutant powers have something to do with it. I think that's one of the reasons this can't really work as a horror series. You just know what the threat is. But the other thing is, when it actually tries to be a horror movie, it's hilarious. And no, it's not intending to be. Look at this scene where they're building up that something is outside Ileana's door. What? And then to make it goofier, she makes her little puppet talk.
It's her.
That was meant to be scary, guys. Look at this scene where this guy sees this girl on fire. It looks kind of cool, but it's not really scary. This eventually causes him to use his mutant power lighting himself on fire, and look how they respond to it. Oh my god, that is so funny. Oh, but that's nothing. You know what the big threat is they have to fight at the end? A giant, supernatural, red-eye glowing bear. I am dead serious. This is supposed to be the threat that everybody is afraid of. Did they see Annihilation and we're like, well, that bear was scary, maybe we can do something like that? And then it doesn't help that they have to use their mutant powers to defeat it, and it kind of goes back to being a generic comic book movie, but most of the film was not a generic comic book movie. It was like this psychological thriller, and you found out about these people, and there was almost no action in it at all, and suddenly there's flips and kicks and beams, and I mean, come on, man, clearly these don't go. Had the film possessed a sense of humor like the It movies did, you know, like, yeah, sometimes they're scary, sometimes they're not, but even if they're not, it's kind of funny, maybe this could have worked. But you can tell that's not what they're going for. Though, to be honest, it is hard to know what they're going for. Is this supposed to be a horror film, or a character study, or an action flick, or a tie-in to X-Men, or just its own thing? It just doesn't feel like it exists in the same universe. But I can't ignore that first half where I really like listening to these people. It reminds me a lot of the second Avengers movie. You remember that one scene where they're at the party and they're just kind of talking, and then the action happens and they have to stop Ultron, and that stuff was okay. But I kind of just wanted to watch them at the party the whole time, like that would be entertaining enough. The first half of this movie is kind of like that. I like listening to these people. I like hearing what their issues are, and I like seeing how they interact off of one another. Unlike Avengers 2, it isn't just one short scene, it's half the movie. But also unlike Avengers 2, instead of the action being at least fun, it's giant bear. Giant bear, come on, say that without laughing. So okay, do I recommend this movie? I guess it depends on what you're going to tolerate. I'll admit, I don't regret seeing it. I do really like these actors, and I like seeing them talk. I know that sounds strange, but just seeing them talk is actually very entertaining for me. I mean, they're just really good at it. I also kind of like the buildup of what's going on. I think the scariest scene is just looking at this computer screen saying what's happening, and what's to be done about it, and who's to be terminated. There's something really eerie about that. But when it has to be a comic book movie or a horror film or whatever, it's not very good. If you're one of those glass half full people that says, yeah, I would like to see half a movie that's pretty decent and interesting, I would say check this out. But if you're one of those people that says they want a good product from beginning to end, these mutants aren't gonna be that new for very long. Does this count? I mean, it's kind of a Disney film, but it's also mainly a ride, but it's a ride where you just look at a screen, and then I decided, fuck it, it's my list, I do as I like. Applejacks. Captain EO, I guess, is what you would call a 4D movie. If you're not familiar with that, it's a 3D movie that also has elements around the theater that interact with you, like, say, smoke, or lasers, or flashing lights tied to the movie, stuff like that. But this one was very unique. It was starring Michael Jackson, produced by George Lucas, was directed by Francis Ford Coppola, and was written by both of them. And this guy I never heard of. I guess the idea is Disney Imagineers just kinda thought this up and went to all these people and they said, sure. And believe it or not, this was my introduction to Michael Jackson. That's right, I was 6 years old, I had never heard of him before, and this is the first time I saw him in anything. And I was blown away by two things. One, that he wasn't a woman. That legitimately surprised me. But I didn't care what sex he was because of two, I never seen anything move like him. I remember thinking, how do his legs do that? How does he move that way? I'm a little kid, I have a ton of energy, and even I don't know how to move like that. It felt like the coolest alien in the world came down to Earth just to show us a bunch of cool shit he can do. Which, I think the verdict is still kind of out on that. The story, if you can call it that, is very Michael Jackson. In that, there's not really much of a story, it's more an excuse just to have some songs and do and be stuff he clearly just kinda wanted to do and be around that time. This time he wants to be a space captain, with a bunch of colorful, goofy alien friends that are, in trouble because they're caught by the Supreme Leader, played by Angelica Houston. But through the power of song and dance, he's going to change the world and make all these evil robot slaves into these groovy, funky, oh my god, what is this? And even transform the Supreme Leader back into a beautiful goddess, because I guess this world was roboticized like in Sonic the Hedgehog, and it was originally Greek pillars where they, sung songs and discussed Socrates. It makes no sense. I'm actually really shocked Michael Jackson had no part in writing this because it 100% feels like he put this together. When you think of Moonwalker and Thriller and Ghost, they're not really stories as much as elements from the stories that he kind of liked when other more talented people did them. For example, this is very clearly 80s sci-fi. It's Star Wars, it's Battlestar Galactica, it's lasers and smoke and evil robots with wires and sharp things hanging off of them. Honestly, if you want to sum up all popular 80s sci-fi at the time, I think it's all kind of here. There's not a lot of detail or story behind it, but that's kind of what you expect from a Michael Jackson music video, as well as his kind of weird, cheesy awkwardisms that are just so much fun. They're ridiculous, but it's kind of like a little kid telling a story. It has its own unique charm to it. He literally uses dancing to change all the bad people into good people. I mean, come on, that's adorable. I'll just say it, 6-year-old me was terrified of Angelica Houston in this. It's so funny because I always associate her with this very sophisticated woman who raises an eyebrow and has this power and control over these subtleties, yet I see her in something like The Witches and this, and I just love seeing her go so over the top. I look back and realize how ridiculous it was I was afraid of this thing. I mean, just listen to her talk.
So, then we both admit to your stupidity.
She's like Rita Repulsa being connected by Comcast. Still, I was 6, this was in 3D, and it scared the shit out of me. But this is one of the earlier examples I can think of where something was really scary and menacing, but if you just wade through it, you can see some really cool stuff. I'm glad I peeked through my fingers to see how this was gonna turn out, because you know what? The stuff after was really, really cool. I'm kinda shocked this whole idea of dance foo, this idea of combining fighting and dancing at the same time hasn't caught on more. I feel like martial arts and dancing surprisingly go hand in hand, so I'm kinda shocked I don't see it in more places, but maybe I'm just not looking in the right spots. And the sets he dances across are incredible. Look at this, how much time went into these models or these costumes and pillars and smoke, and I just can't believe this was just for a Disney ride. So I guess it's weird to recommend this, as the idea is you're supposed to kind of see it on this really long big screen with 3D and other little effects around it, but even on its own it's still a cool looking production with a lot of great effects, and yeah, Michael Jackson's amazing dancing, I mean it can't be topped. It's impossible to take it seriously, but I don't think it's supposed to be. It's a silly way to waste 20 minutes while also looking at some really creative visuals. It may be silly, but it's the awesome kind of silly. Well, I've seen everything else Lilo and Stitch. Why not watch the series? I think this is it. I think I've finally seen everything Lilo and Stitch related. Oh, come on, there's an anime? No, screw it, I'm stopping here. That's not to say at all I didn't have a lot of fun watching this show. In fact, everything Lilo and Stitch has really grown on me. And this is already coming from a place of love because I liked the movie. And though that was a modest success when it came out, it's grown quite the following over the years, resulting in sequels, a series, hell, like I said, even an anime, and tons of merchandise. And honestly, I can see why. These are very, very, very charming characters. Taking place in between the Lilo and Stitch sequels, yeah, like I said, I'm kind of watching this out of order. A ton of experiments have been unleashed, and an intergalactic criminal named Hamsterwheel, or is it Hamster Wheel, they kind of go back and forth, is using his forcibly retired henchman Gantu to capture them all and use them as weapons. Lilo and Stitch, naturally, don't want them to be used as weapons and instead try to capture them to, well, set them free, give them a place that they can call home. Yeah, it's kinda like Disney's Pokemon. Every week there's a new creature that can do a new power, but I actually kinda like the idea that they're not capturing them to use them as weapons. If anything, I feel like the Pokemon trainers would be seen as villains in this world. They're kinda more like the crocodile hunter. They capture them, but then they try to take them to a place where they can be safe, and I like that. You don't usually see that in kid shows. If something's trying to kill you, you just kill it right back, or stop it in some way. Here, they just try to find the right place where they belong. And that's kind of the attitude of the whole show. Nice and laid back. So many Disney shows, hell, just so many kid shows in general are trying to be the next big thing, really action-packed and saying cool phrases, and they all look beautiful and wear the latest fashions, you know the drill. And while I like some shows that do that, like Kim Possible, especially because I felt like they utilized that into the joke, Lilo and Stitch has much more of an innocent quality. It's kind of like a mix of the adventure elements from Miyazaki films and the relaxed elements of Winnie the Pooh, and they surprisingly work really well together. Even the animation isn't anything groundbreaking, but it's decent and non-threatening. I really like that they still use watercolor backgrounds. Whenever a violent moment does work its way into the show, it's usually done with a lot of creativity and again, a lot of comedy. And so much of the comedy comes from the voice actors. I really like that they use the original cast all throughout this series. Davey Chase, David Ogden Stiers, Tia Carrere, Kevin Michael Richardson, all of them are so funny. And even the newcomers are great, with Jeff Bennett as Hamsterwheel and Rob Paulson as Ruben, this sidekick alien who's obsessed with sandwiches. Yeah, it doesn't sound that funny, but he uses that Bill Burr voice that just cracks me the hell up, and I love it. I feel like they really take advantage of the fact that this takes place in Hawaii, because everyone is just so chill. No one even really cares that there's aliens walking around, they just kind of accept it at this point. And yeah, you know how Disney's been on this ethical, preachy high horse recently, like everything they talk about has to have some sort of social self-righteousness to it? There's literally a cross-dressing alien in this, and it feels totally natural. It starts off as kind of a joke, you know, he's dressing up like the wife and the other alien is dressing up like the husband, but he just seems to like it, and nobody has a problem with it. And there's no special episode where they're wagging their finger at you that kids always seem to hate, and adults seem to hate for that matter. He just likes to wear dresses, and nobody cares. Kick ass, man, you do you. Speaking of lessons, there are quite a few in this show, and they're usually the ones you'd expect. The value of friendship, being confident, believing in yourself, all that stuff. It's nothing that mind-blowing, but I don't think it's supposed to be in a show like this. Sometimes even characters from other shows pop up to enforce that lesson. Yeah, there's a lot of crossovers in this. If there was an animated Disney show on at the time, chances are it made its way onto Lilo and Stitch. You name it, the Proud Family, Kim Possible, Jake Long, even Recess somehow worked its way in there. I wouldn't mind too much, except they all kind of seem really scrunched together, like every other episode felt like a crossover episode, at least in season 2. But again, if the show had great characters, it was nice to see them interact with these great characters as well. If I had one problem with the show, and this is a really odd thing to critique, I'd actually say it's the intro. I mean, yeah, the song's fine and it looks cute and everything, but I'll just say it, there's something bizarrely creepy about this scene. I don't know if you're trying to kiss me or eat me, but I don't like it. It even holds on the title uncomfortably long.
Wow!
Cut! But yeah, if the intro is the biggest complaint I can have about this show, I think it's doing a lot of things right. Like I said, I don't think this is one of the great shows or anything, but it's a nice, smaller show, and you know what? We need those. I feel like we take them for granted, and they actually play a bigger part than sometimes we give them credit for. I especially like how it got me more into the alien stuff. In the original film, I liked the stuff with the sisters, but the aliens were just kind of generic to me. But the show actually made them really funny, and I liked seeing these different creations, and they were weird and imaginative, and I liked seeing how they had a different solution for every one, and how they were going to interact with these great characters. So if you're a Lilo and Stitch fan, definitely check it out. Even if you're not, I still might recommend it. If you're just in the mood to watch something laid back and extremely cute, Lilo and Stitch have got you covered. Yep, I'm one of those idiots who didn't see Hamilton on stage when I had the chance. You might be wondering, how is that possible? It started in Chicago, it ran forever in Chicago, and everyone in Chicago has seen it. Except me, of course. Well, I heard snippets of it here and there, and saw some recordings, once in a while just post on the news or whatever. And my thought was, yeah, I know this is great, but I'm sure most of it's just in the music and the lyrics and how fast it is and clever it is, so I figured wait for something like this on Disney+. There's not gonna be any crazy set work or amazing choreography, and yeah, I was wrong. I was definitely wrong on that. The Disney Plus streaming of Hamilton very clearly shows that there's a lot of great dancing and there's some amazing set work, and I'm a dumbass for not seeing it when I should have. With that said, what are my thoughts about Hamilton after finally watching it? It's okay. Now, who am I kidding? It's really, really friggin' good. Pretty much everything you heard about it is true. The writing is amazing, the songs are awesome, the choreography so friggin' cool, the style unique, the acting fantastic. It's like the style and comedy of epic rap battles meets the drama and poignancy of Jesus Christ Superstar. It's everything you've heard it was. So, what exactly can I add to it? Well, a couple things if you're a newcomer, I guess. I saw a lot of videos after this streamed of people saying, yes, I was the one who didn't see Hamilton, like, well, I just started off this video. So I think it's very clear there are a lot of people who have not seen this show. And as a newbie, I think there are some different points of views I can offer. First off, when it starts, don't think this is what the entire show is going to be like. The opening is very slow, very simple. I dare even say some of the actors singing are not singing the way they're comfortable singing. If I didn't see other snippets from the show, I'd shrug and be like, what is everybody talking about? But that's the thing. When you pay for a ticket to see it on the stage, you're stuck. So the show kind of tricks you. It makes you think this is going to be just another average show with slower songs, and boom, suddenly it explodes with life and everybody is talking a million words a minute. So if you put on the first minute and say this isn't for me, wait for it. Second, having not seen the show on stage, I can still tell the dancing would be a lot better live. Now, don't get me wrong, the dancing looks amazing. I especially love the spinning stage and different parts of it turn at different speeds. Some are still, some move, and the way they utilize that is spectacular. But it is filmed, and you have to edit when you film, and you have to get close-ups and far-off shots and tight shots and wide angles, above shots, and that's just not what it was made for. Again, it looks great, but after a while I started to look at the dancers in the background and I was saying to myself, I don't think those moves were meant for that angle. There's plenty of times where they shoot it great, but I just know it look a lot better on stage. The cast? Pfft, I don't even have the words, man. Everybody is perfect. Usually when I see a show, there's a couple people or at least one person where I'm like, alright, they were a little off or weren't quite in the groove, but everyone else was good. No, everyone here is phenomenal. I don't even think it's a matter of pointing out which ones are better because they're all the height of their game. All you can do is point out your personal favorites. Mine personally was the guy who played Washington. Yeah, I know, the guys who play Aaron Burr or Jefferson or of course Hamilton usually get all the credit, but I don't know, something about the way this guy played it. He just always looked pained, like every choice he made he knew was going to have dire consequences, even if it was the right choice. King George, of course, gets a lot of laughs, but as you'd imagine, when it gets serious, it gets really serious, especially in the second half. Most people usually like one half of a Broadway show more than the other. They usually like the first half, which has a lot of energy and sucking people in, or they like the second half, where things slow down and there's a little bit more character. This one does the same thing, but they're both equally good. I was kind of afraid when things slowed down that it wasn't going to have the same energy as before, but again, with such an amazing cast handling this, you hang on their every word. I know a little bit of history, at least enough to know what happens to Alexander Hamilton, and no, I swear I didn't learn that from the Got Meal commercial. I read a history book, really. No, honestly, fuck off. Yet every scene that happens, despite them foreshadowing the hell out of it, still comes at you like, well, a bullet. The emotional moments hit so hard, and I could actually feel my heart beating when they cut the music in one of the final songs. They really did an amazing job showing this life or death experience that, well, it's leaning a lot more towards death. It's chilling, it's heartbreaking. A lot of stage shows have taken one moment and dragged it out 1 second and they play a whole song through it, but something about this one really got to me. So, with all that, is there anything I don't like? The intermission seemed pointless. I guess at first I was put off that they still had the audience there, but then the more I thought about it, the audience does kind of play a big part in the show. There are scenes that are very similar to a rap battle, and I love hearing the crowd get into it. They applaud or go, "Oh!" And yeah, I think that actually does add a lot. What can I say? It's great. It's everything everybody has been saying about it and more. If you haven't checked it out, even if you're not a Broadway or musical person, it's still so impressive to check out. Like me now, you have no excuse not to watch it. So click on in, take a look, and don't miss your shot. It's The Incredible Journey and Homeward Bound: The Incredible Journey. Yeah, these films are so similar, I just decided to do them both in the same video. Both these movies have the exact same story, yet very different ways of presenting it. And both result in very decent family films. The original, The Incredible Journey, is about two dogs and a cat that, through a misunderstanding, think their caregiver has left them and go on a grand adventure to find their owners. And that's about it. There's not really too much other story, and honestly, you don't need it, as they come across so many strange and dangerous things, like bears and porcupines and crazy people. Alright, maybe not all dangerous, just weird. But they come across some nice people too. Some try to help them out, even keep them, but the animals always leave to find their true home. The remake is essentially the same thing, there's just one major difference. In one version, the animals don't talk, and in the other, they do. Robert Redford, Michael J. Fox, and Sally Field are the voices in the remake. To my astonishment, both versions actually work pretty well in their own right. Don't get me wrong, they can both be very corny too, as you'd expect from films like this, but both seem to have an understanding of the nature of animals. They just express it in different ways. The original has a narrator. He talks through the film very similar to how a nature documentary would work, and it just so happens Disney did a lot of those at the time, though many of them were as staged as this movie was. It creates kind of a laid-back atmosphere, but at the same time it doesn't ignore the real dangers that are out there for our main characters. It's funny, just through select camera angles, editing, and the narration, you can suddenly see so much personality out of these three animals that probably had no idea what was going on when they were filming. Speaking of which, I really question how they got some of these shots, as the animals really look like they're in intense danger or pain half the time. Christ, they put them through rapids, they have them go up against bears. In the remake, you could argue they use more advanced effects, but in the 60s? I don't know, some of this is really uncomfortable to watch. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and trust the animals were okay, but if you're not a fan of seeing animals in what looks like real danger, you might not be the biggest fan of this. The remake gets rid of the idea of a narrator and just had the animals say what they're thinking while they're thinking it. You have Robert Redford as the wise old dog, Michael J. Fox as the young scrappy pup, and Sally Field as the know-it-all cat. Again, I was amazed at how easily I totally bought these animals were thinking what the movie was saying they were thinking. Not just from the voiceover work, I mean those are all great actors, but from how well they train the animals, the angles, the expressions they get out of them, and funny enough, even some of the dialogue. I mean, sure, a lot of it's silly and has jokes for kids, you'd expect that out of a film like this, but one of the jokes is he goes up to a stranger's butt and says, "I never forget a face." While that's a cute joke, it does also kind of make sense. That is how a lot of animals identify who somebody is. In fact, when I watch this film, I still have a hard time imagining that this is the old one, this is the young one, and this one is male. I still weirdly hear the voices from Homeward Bound, which I guess shows you how much of an impression that film made. But there is something I enjoy more about that relaxing narrator's voice and the fact that I have to really read the expressions on the animals to figure out what they're thinking. And yes, it definitely has its own corny moments. I especially love when the cat comes across this family and the kid is like, "Sing me a lullaby," and the father just has this perfect operatic voice. Oh, that's just how you sound when you're not trying to sing, huh? Okay. Still, these are both perfectly fine flicks. Both kids and adults can watch them and enjoy them, and if you like dogs and or cats like I do, it's always kind of neat to see them interact with other animals and people, and hopefully nothing too dangerous. And it's nice to see it done in two very different styles. If you're gonna remake a Disney film, this isn't a bad way to do it. Hell, they kinda did the same thing with 101 Dalmatians, but they flipped it around. They took the talking animals and made it so they don't talk. It's honestly not a bad idea, Disney. Disney! So yeah, if you got an hour and a half, or maybe even 3 hours, and you just want to see a couple of films about two dogs and a little cat that go on this amazing adventure, these aren't bad ones to check out. Yeah, alright, this is technically a cheat, seeing how this is a Fox movie and it came out before Disney bought Fox, but the first two films were Disney, so screw it. I'm talking about Narnia, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Hard to believe this came out over 10 years ago. If you've seen my review of the other Narnia movies, you know I liked them quite a bit. I only read the first book, but was still very impressed with how they adapted it, and even though I didn't read the second one, I liked the film version just fine. But both those films I enjoyed enough to watch several times. This one I just saw when it came out in theaters and haven't seen it since. My memory was, it was alright. It had some good moments, it had some dumb moments, but it didn't piss me off or blow me away. And seeing it years later, it's about what I still think. Lucy and Edmund return to Narnia once again in a very creative way. That might be my favorite thing about these movies. I just love the ways they get to Narnia. This time, though, they're joined by their pompous cousin, Eustace, who's a little too good at this performance, but we'll get to that in a bit. They come across a ship captained by Caspian and try to figure out why they're there because everything honestly seems alright. There's no major dangers or anything like that. That is until they come across this one land where they sell people into slavery and then send their families off into this mist that just sort of takes them somewhere. They don't even know where, they just say it's a sacrifice, and I don't know, let's get them back, I guess. As you'd imagine on their journeys, they come across all sorts of weird creatures and characters, some good, some bad, but all of it magical, and of course it builds up to a great big climax that, full disclosure, I didn't even remember what they fought in the climax when I saw it years ago. That's not a good sign. That's supposed to be like the most memorable part of a movie, isn't it? Or at least the most heart-pounding one? Truth be told, I often had to remind myself what the mission even was. There's this girl that sneaks on board and she's looking for her mother that was taken in the mist, and you don't really see much of her with the mother. She doesn't really talk that much about the mother. She doesn't even have that much of a personality. There might have been a mention of something else, of Narnia going to shit or going to the promised land, you know, something like that, but it's not made exactly that clear. So the stakes don't seem especially high, but the characters are still likable. For the most part. Again, having not read the sequel books, I don't really know what the dilemmas or developments were with the characters, but in this one, they're a little weak. Edmund once again is tempted by the ghost of the White Witch, which it is kind of funny how Tilda Swinton dies in the first movie, yet somehow she's in all of these. And sometimes he has a little competition with Caspian, which is like, really? We're doing this? But give him credit, it's better than Lucy's development. Her big arc is she wants to be as pretty as her sister. That's really what you're focusing on this trip? I understand looking up to a sibling, even being jealous of some things, but on this quest where you have to save people and go on these missions, don't you think you'd be a little bit more envious of the fact that she could shoot a bow and arrow perfectly, rule a kingdom? Really? Her looks is what you're focusing on while this adventure is happening? But it could be worse. You could be Eustace. Eustace is so over-the-top miserable, it almost works as satire. Don't get me wrong, he's played well, and I'm sure he gave exactly what the director was looking for. But a performance this complainy and this stuck up has to have some good writing, and it just doesn't. If he had some good one-liners or comparisons, maybe this would work, but they're not that funny or clever.
I've been abducted by my cousin, thieving marmot, in some ridiculous-looking boat. I can only assume that this is the result of poor diet. He's even more deluded than my cousin.
So he's just constantly nagging until his arc. And it's like Mr. Freeze and the ice puns in Batman and Robin, like, oh no, not every line could be an ice pun, but it is. It's the same here. Every line is literally a complaint. There's only one line that got a laugh out of me, and it's when he was trying to escape early on.
Oh, you're a boat in a magical land. Can't you row yourself?
Yeah, okay, that was pretty good. But yeah, he gets really annoying really fast, and it's a shame. He can do the dramatic readings actually pretty well. I feel like if they just gave him some better writing, he could turn in something pretty cool. But sheesh, I'm talking like I hate this movie, and I really don't. Honestly, these moments aren't even that bad. They're just a little underwhelming. What is effective are the moments where they have to work off of each other. I find this cast actually does have pretty good chemistry. The strange and imaginative characters they come across, and some of the funny ways they have to defeat them. And weird little things I wouldn't think would be particularly strong, but actually leave quite an impact. For example, this time the mouse is played by Simon Pegg, and he's actually really good in this. I didn't have a problem with the mouse in the last film, and Eddie Izzard played him fine, but something about this one, he really has this great charm and charisma and dimension, and I kind of like the rivalry he has with Eustace, but he's trying to teach him lessons as well, and yeah, even later he tries to really calm him down and make him feel better, and they have kind of a friendship. Tell you the truth, he probably has the most emotional moment in the movie near the end. It really works. Aslan is in it as well, and he's once again voiced by Liam Neeson, and he does fine, but I will say he looks a little different. He doesn't look bad, but I can't explain it. Something looks a little more cartoony about him than in the previous films. But he works fine. I think that's the best way I can describe this film. It's fine. Is anything demanding that you see it? Not especially, but if you do just kind of want to see all the films and want to see these actors grow up and go on another adventure, that's exactly what it is. It's not a great Narnia movie, it's just another Narnia movie. I don't regret seeing it, but I didn't take a ton away from it either. If you're a fan of the Narnia movies and just want to see what happens next just so you can see what happens next, I say check it out. But if you're looking for an emotional roller coaster written by one of the great authors of fantasy, I'd probably say sail on by. Zombies the Musical. I don't know. Sure, we've had Disney villain teens have their own musical, second-born royals get their own movie. Why not give a fad that's already dying down a shot? Honestly, I'm forming a theory that if a Disney Channel movie is being made about the subject, it's probably not popular with adults anymore. People sent me the trailers to this, and like them, I thought this looked awful. Another piss-poor combination of all the things that Disney thinks is successful and is gonna make them a lot of money. Musicals, zombies, cheerleading, beautiful teens. Which is why you might be shocked to hear, in all honesty, it's really not that bad. Don't get me wrong, it's nothing great. It's not any phenomenal thing that you should go out and see. I don't even know if I really recommend it that much for adults, but for such a desperate idea that was clearly forced on this creative team and cast, they turn out something that's okay. For what it is. The movie opens with the line, "Who would have thought the zombie apocalypse would happen from lime soda?" Already, that's a pretty unique way to start. Soda spilled on this big motherboard in this big high-tech place that turned a bunch of people into man-eating zombies, and you know what, it doesn't matter. The movie rushes by it, and even it kind of acts like it's not really important. What is important is zombies are apparently like regular people now, for the most part. They still have a hunger for brains and stuff like that, but there's this little, I don't know, bracelet that keeps them under control unless you hack it, allowing a little bit more of their zombie powers to take hold. It's weird, but I thought that was gonna be the least of the problems. Once you see our main characters, Zed, a zombie who wants to join the football team, and Addison, a girl who was born with white hair, so she has to wear a wig so nobody would be like, oh my god, she has white hair, and yeah, of course, she wants to be on the cheerleading team. Address the camera and tell them how excited they are that zombies are finally gonna be allowed in school, but who knows if they're gonna fit in? God, I was ready to despise this. But as soon as they walk outside and you see all the people are wearing these blue and pink pastels and all the zombies are in this really crummy but colorful neighborhood and they're right next to each other like a cartoon, I got the feeling this movie was a little self-aware. When they get to school, they see the lead cheerleader named Bucky is obsessed with being number one because quite frankly their football team is terrible. They're so bad their mascot is a shrimp. Bucky is so egotistical that he jumps through a picture of himself in the exact same pose while another picture of the exact same pose is right behind it. I'm sorry, that's funny. Zombies, as you'd expect, are not very welcomed in the high school. In fact, they put all of them in the basement and have another zombie teach them.
Do some grammar.
This is supposed to be chemistry.
Look, 45 minutes ago, I was a janitor kid, so.
I'm sorry, this is good writing. But that changes when they find out Zed, once his arm bracelet is tinkered with a little bit, has incredible strength and they want him on the football team. Zed agrees, but some changes have to be made, like the zombies are allowed in the cafeteria and don't have to stay in the basement and so forth. The high school agrees as long as he wins a game. So he and his friends keep fiddling with the bracelet, allowing him to get stronger and stronger, and yeah, okay, you know what's gonna happen, right? The liar revealed story, and everybody's gonna hate him, and the girlfriend's gonna hate him. Oh yeah, by the way, they're falling in love too. You have a Romeo and Juliet thing going on. But surprisingly, they work it in kinda cleverly. When it is revealed that he's using the bracelet kinda like zombie steroids, everyone goes from cheering to booing him, but Addison brings up the only reason he did it is because he wouldn't be treated like a human being if he didn't. And that's a good point. It isn't just a simple prejudice is bad story. Like I said, I'm so sick of those from Disney. They're just done so poorly now. It actually looks at it from a couple different points of view. It's something that's relatable, and the characters don't always do what you think these characters are going to do. I mean, when he's revealed and everyone's booing him, you know there has to be a breakup because there's always a breakup at this point, but it's not done for the reason you think. Usually in a scenario like this, the character finds out something and then has to lie, saying, no, I don't love you anymore, and then the girl finds out the truth, but no, he straight up says, everyone's against us. This is gonna be too much, it's not gonna be good for us. Let's try to live normal lives, and that's actually kind of relatable. It's a tough thing to figure out, especially as a kid. And on top of that, there's still some really good jokes. I love it when the coach's strategy for the team is,
move forward, move all the way forward. Don't go back. There's nothing back here. This is empty. You don't need to go back here. You need to go up here.
Yeah, as you can see, this actually did get a few laughs out of me. Now, with that said, it still isn't anything that fantastic. I mean, it is still a Disney property trying to combine all these popular things, and it shows. There's obvious phrases that hammer in the message like, well, one person can't make a difference. What if we all try to make a difference? Yeah, they're talking about cheerleading, but you know what they're talking about. It's nice that it seems like going into this they have an understanding that this is ridiculous and they're gonna make fun of the fact that it's ridiculous. But it still has to meet those check marks. There's gotta be the girl who likes fighting against the man. There's gotta be the bullies. There's gotta be the kid that has a secret but doesn't want it to get out there. That secret's not even that bad. There's even a scene where she says, hey, if I had white hair in another school, it probably wouldn't be a big deal, but this school, it wouldn't fly. Like, yeah, even they're kind of acknowledging it's not really that bad. But even with all that, it never takes itself too seriously. Again, maybe it's because I just saw that Second-Born Royals crap, and that was just so lame and so pretentious and so thought it was saying something amazing that I kinda like this one's getting out of the way of its own bullshit. When characters are mean, they're mean in a fun way. When a song sequence pops up, they're legit well danced and well sung. When the main leads have to be charming, they are really, really charming, and all those check marks they have to hit, they hit them, but they don't focus too long on them. I'd say if you're kind of in that tween age or younger, maybe high school if you're in kind of a silly mood, you'll probably enjoy this fine. If you're any older than that, I wouldn't say seek it out, but if somebody younger than you is watching it, I would say maybe tune in every once in a while. You might get a snicker here and there. Is that a glowing review? I guess not, but for a film I was expecting to despise, I'm surprised it came out this content. Not great, but not bad either. If you have even the tiniest bit of interest in this, my guess is you'll find there's more brains behind this than you would have thought. It's the one-season show, Tron Uprising. This is one of those series that everybody was telling me I have to watch. It's so good, it's actually even better than that Tron movie that came out a few years earlier. And when I finally sat down and watched it, yeah, they were right, but it was kind of a slow burn to get there. But it kinda doesn't matter because it's such an amazing looking show anyway, with one hell of a voice cast. A mechanic named Beck, played by Elijah Wood, is training under the original renegade Tron, voiced by Bruce Boxleitner, the Tron from the first film. They're under the rule of General Tessler, voiced by Lance Hendrickson, who answers to Clue, the bad guy from Tron Legacy. Beck poses as Tron the same way Antonio Banderas posed as Zorro, to convince people that Tron isn't dead, that he's still as young and strong as ever and a revolution will be happening. Some people have mixed feelings, like his mechanic co-workers Zed and Mara, played by Nate Cordy and Mandy Moore, but every episode the Renegade tries to take down this terrible dictatorship and yeah, that's pretty much it. For the most part. Okay, how do I explain this? The first half of the season is kinda like a Monster of the Week show or a Home Improvement episode. There's a formula. Beck tries to do something to throw Tessler off. Tessler screams to the gods and tells them to get that renegade. His mechanic friends always have a conversation whether Tron is good or bad, and of course, wonder why Beck is always late to work. And Tron always has some tough life lesson. Rinse, repeat, nothing much to it. But for whatever reason, everything suddenly got interesting when a character named Dyson came in halfway through. He's played by John Glover, and you find out there's this past between him and Tron, and you go a little bit more into the history, and the funny thing is, Dyson is only in one episode. I mean, he might cameo here and there, but it's not like this one character transformed the show. But for whatever reason, all of a sudden, the stories start to change a little bit. There's more conflict, more confrontation, more backstory. More people changing their minds, more people changing sides. Some go from good to bad, some go from bad to good. We even get the story about how Beck joins Tron. Stuff that I didn't think they were ever gonna answer, I kinda just got used to the formula. But in a funny way, that kinda made it more interesting. It's like an Avatar when you got to the episode about the storm. Yeah, the show was good and there was a lot to admire, but that episode suddenly elevated everything to a new level, and everything after it seemed to just get better and better. But even before then, there was still a lot of stuff that was very impressive. Like I said before, the voice cast. Everyone is doing a stellar job. They're even taking some of these commonly used cliched lines that you've heard in a million other kid shows and make it sound so much more dramatic and important. I especially love Paul Reubens as the slimy second-in-command who's always the kiss-ass and always trying to get the credit, and yeah, I usually hate these characters because they're so boring, but he just adds this psychotic life to the character that's so much fun to watch.
Seems like Tesla's on shaky ground. You don't think Clue's considering demoting him? Nah, me neither.
Whenever he screams like a madman, he sounds just like Pee-wee, but it doesn't sound distracting. It actually really helps the character out. Whenever he jumps around going, ah, you're both kind of laughing, but kind of intimidated by him too. It's just a great character. Something else that's also amazing about the show? The look. I don't know what the name of this style is, but I've seen it a lot and I love it. I saw it in that Zima Blue episode of Love, Death, and Robots. I saw it in that World Record episode of Animatrix. And I feel like as technology gets better in animation, so does this style. Everything from the designs, the colors, the angles. This is a gorgeous show. I've honestly never seen anything quite like it, even though I've referenced those other shorts and shows before. This is a whole new level. Like going from Charles Fleischer's Superman to Batman the Animated Series. Yeah, it's a similar style, but you can just tell everything was improved on, evolving it to something really unique. I usually don't get too into that style where it's CG, but it's supposed to kinda look like it was hand-drawn, but you know it's still clearly CG. But here it works because it's supposed to look really flat. It's supposed to be very simple shapes and very sharp colors, and piercing blacks and wide lenses, and imagery that you practically want to frame with every shot. It's funny because the original Tron had a very distinct look. Nobody ever really saw anything like that. And then Tron Legacy came along, took that look, and evolved it into something a little different, but you could still tell it was Tron. Now you have Tron Uprising, who's taking the look of Tron Legacy, also kind of doing something different with it, but you can still tell it's that same universe. I love how this art style has mutated so much, yet it's still familiar. You know what it is, you recognize it as Tron. I also gotta say, for a supposed kid show, there is a high-ass death count in this. Yeah, I know they just say they're de-resed or whatever, but a lot of people who are alive and conscious are suddenly not. Whatever you want to call that, it's pretty intense. Which is why I wish the first half of the show would have more of a story and dialogue that would reflect that intensity. But I guess I shouldn't complain because we do get that eventually, just halfway through. So yeah, I still highly recommend it. If you don't really get into the story and characters at first, stick with it, it does get better. And if for some reason it's still not grabbing you, just admire the look of it. I really think this is one of those shows people are gonna look back on and say, man, this was ahead of its time, this was revolutionary, nobody was doing shows quite like this. Again, with the design and style, in terms of character and story, it gets there. Whether you like the Tron movies, don't like them, like one but not the other, this is definitely worth taking a look at. It might be a slow burn, but it delivers one hell of a beautiful fire. Huck Finn is said by many to be one of the great American masterpieces, if not the great American masterpiece. It's one of the most brilliant books ever written, and the line about going to hell still sends shivers down my spine every time I hear it. Both children and adults can read the book and be incredibly moved by it. In my opinion, it's one of the greatest things ever written. Which is why, when a totally passable version comes along, like The Adventures of Huck Finn in 1993, I can acknowledge it was good, but man, wish it was great. I feel like a story this good needs a director like Francis Ford Coppola or Stanley Kubrick, one of the big greats, instead of, the guy who did the Mummy movies, and G.I. Joe, and Van Helsing, and actually it's kind of amazing this movie's as good as it is the more I think about it. Elijah Wood plays Huck Finn, and I'm just gonna say it, he is the best Huck Finn I've ever seen. The same way everyone jumped for excitement when they heard he was gonna play Frodo because that's such perfect casting, it's the same thing here. When I read the book, his face and voice is what pops in my head immediately. It's like Kevin Conroy and Batman, you just connect the two together. He's on the run from just about everybody for getting in all sorts of trouble. He makes a river raft for himself and floats on down the river, and makes a close friend with a runaway slave named Jim, played by Courtney B. Vance. Along the way, he comes across all sorts of strange characters, gets in a lot of close calls, both humorous and serious, and discovers not only the importance of friendship, but the importance of friendship during racial inequality. I feel like Roger Ebert summed up this movie best by saying it doesn't dwell on its message, but it doesn't ignore it either. Huck Finn is supposed to be as much fun as it is dramatic. They kind of feed into each other. It's like a Christmas Carol that way. You can't really appreciate the difficult stuff without the joyful stuff, and you can't really appreciate the joyful stuff without the difficult stuff. And it's there, it's just not there to the magnitude the book was. It's funny I brought up Batman earlier because there is kind of a comparison here. Imagine if the only animated Batman movie you saw was Batman Sub-Zero, and this was your representation of Batman. It'd be good, it'd be fine, it's a decent movie, it has a lot of character and story, it's good. But you could have gotten Mask of the Phantasm, one of the great Batman movies. I kind of feel the same here. The cheerful moments are very funny and upbeat, and the dramatic moments are very effective in the moment. I especially like the scenes where they're confessing their friendship to each other near the end. But I remember how shook to the core I was when I read that great speech that Huck said about how he'd rather go to hell than turn in his best friend because that's what he was taught. He was taught that God would damn him to hell if he was on the side of a slave. And he was pretty much accepting that because his friendship with this human being was just so strong. Like I said, I still get goosebumps whenever I think back to that moment, and I just don't feel it here. Maybe because it is a Disney film, maybe because it is the guy who has done, let's face it, a lot lighter stuff in his career. Or maybe it's because the movie needed to take some risks. And that's not something this director or Disney, at least at that time, was really well known for. It's a very safe Huck Finn story, and I feel like if this was really gonna leave a major impact, it needed to be a bit more daring. I'm not sure how, I'm not exactly a great filmmaker myself, but that's what I feel like was missing to have the same impact as the book. But with that said, it's still a decent adaptation. Elijah Wood, I think, is one of the top 10 best child actors who ever existed, and he's a great grown-up actor too, don't get me wrong, but child acting, given the age and the world these kids have to grow up in, is a very different kind of animal. Throw on top of that time periods and accents. You look at something like Malcolm in the Middle, and those are great child actors as well, but you look at Huck Finn, and it's a completely different style. Yet Elijah Wood is always convincing and always charming. And yes, it does help that he pretty much has anime eyes, which makes him even more expressive. This film also did a great job with its supporting cast. I mean, look at this: Robbie Coltrane, Ron Perlman, Anne Heche, Pete. These are all names that will become great character actors before they became really, really well known. And they lend so much personality to the film. So do I recommend it? Of course I do. But mainly for the acting. I feel that's where its real strength is. And everything else is good. It's a decent telling. Honestly, I can't act like I've seen a ton of versions of Huck Finn. I mean, I just haven't heard of that one great one that everybody talks about, you know what I mean? But if you're interested in seeing a version that has some good performances, or if you have a kid that doesn't really want to read the book but really should know the story, this isn't a bad one to check out. Grab an oar and float on in. Well, I've discovered a few things watching Call of the Wild. I'd argue not many of them good, but still interesting. One is, despite having not read the book Call of the Wild, I discovered I actually read more Jack London books than I thought growing up. White Fang, To Build a Fire, The White Silence. Okay, that's not a ton, but for me to remember these stories and not know they were written by the same guy was actually kind of interesting. I mention this to let you know I have at least somewhat of an understanding of what this guy's writing style is like, and this movie? Yeah, this is literally the PG version of it. Like I said though, that's not the only thing I've learned watching this film. The other thing I learned, if you have the option to use a real dog instead of a CG dog, always choose the real dog. 'Cause man, oh man. Okay, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. The film is about a domesticated but still very rambunctious dog named Buck. One day he's kidnapped from his home though and sold for money, and embarks on an adventure being captured and sold, escape, captured and sold, ultimately leading to a friendship with a prospector played by Harrison Ford. The prospector lost his son, has become an alcoholic, but to remember the good old days and maybe get a little money as well. Yeah, it's kind of confusing why exactly he goes on this trip. He decides to go looking for this cabin that his son used to talk about. One they're not exactly sure exists, but there's a ton of gold to be found there. Along the way, Buck must find his place, discovering whether or not he's man's best friend or an animal of the wild. I'll admit I did look up the story after watching this film to see just how close it did follow it, and it has the very basic bullet points. It's roughly the same plot, though they do change some things, and some I understand, some are just kind of mind-boggling. For example, there's this really prissy guy who's gonna be looking for gold, and he's told you can't go that way, you're gonna die. Well, in the book he does. He's from the city, doesn't know what he's doing, and he disappears very quickly. But in this, not only does he somehow still survive, but with his clear lack of understanding how to survive in the wild, he somehow follows the prospector like miles behind through the mountains and catches up to him, locates him. It makes no sense. This guy can't figure out he's not supposed to take a certain number of dogs yet. He just locates this guy with a dotted line he drew on a map. It's not even on a map. It goes onto a floor, and it's like, that's not the scale. He was just guessing, yet somehow he located him. He located this place that nobody could find. It was supposed to be stuff of legend because nobody could find. It's so stupid. A lot of bad stuff happens to this dog in the book, but all of it's either done off camera or they just write it out. And I don't know, a lot of Jack London's stories are about the harshness of nature and the respect you have to have for it because it is just so cutthroat. It just didn't seem right changing that much, especially a story about a dog discovering he's part of this harsh world, beaten down to a point where he realizes what he really is and where he belongs. And yeah, let's talk about clearly the biggest problem of them all. The dog is CG, and he looks awful. When I saw the trailer to this, I didn't think it was real. I was saying to myself, no, that's gotta be, like, they're not done yet, you know? Like, when you see the movie, it's gonna look amazing, it's gonna blow your mind, because that's such a stupid idea to replace a real dog with a CG dog. It's like The Room making a back alley set or a top of a building set when you could just go to a back alley or a top of a building. I don't think the makers of this really understood the importance of having a real dog there. I guess there was a guy in a motion capture suit doing it, and I'm sure he was acting his head off, but none of this performance is like how a dog would react. It's like how a human imitating a dog would react. Yes, dogs can be very goofy and funny, but they can also be very dignified. The way they can be trained, the way they hold themselves, the way they hunt, the way they track, the way they observe, the way they react to things. They're amazing animals that are incredibly hard to duplicate authentically. Yeah, we can all do impressions and we can look at animated movies and laugh how over the top they are and such, but if you're gonna tell us we're supposed to believe that looks like an actual dog is there, you straight up don't understand the animal. And this is a story all about understanding the animal. The real irony is I was watching this just saying to myself, why didn't they just animate this? Not just the dog and half of the backgrounds, I mean, the entire movie. Not everybody has to look like Spies in disguise. You could have done some more realistic animation, maybe even some motion capture like Polar Express. Seeing this dog in that world would have worked. So much of it is artificial anyway, why did you just go all out? That way I can watch it, and when he does look realistic, which is very rare, but when he does, I can be like, wow, man, that looks so convincing, instead of, oh wow, that 1 or 2 times it looked convincing, like it's supposed to throughout the entire film. No, if it's animated, we give you the benefit of the doubt. We go, wow, okay, this is a different art form, it's supposed to be more expressive, we'll give you that leeway. But here, it fails hard, man. Half the characters already act like cartoons. Dan Stevens plays the guy from the city, and even though he played a CG animated beast, he seems much more cartoony here than in anything else he's been in. It's a shame seeing Harrison Ford really acting his heart out. I mean, doing a pretty good job in this role, against an effect that just can't give him the same support back. But perhaps the most interesting thing I found out about this film was at the very end when I saw who directed it. Chris Sanders. Now, if you know anything about animation, you know that's a big name. The director of Lilo and Stitch, How to Train Your Dragon, The Croods. He was even the voice of Stitch. This is a guy who took stories that have been done over and over again and redid them in a way so that they felt fresh and new. Which is why it's so strange that he's taking on a classic story that clearly should have been animated all the way through, and it doesn't work. I guess I could be really disappointed in that, but honestly, looking at his track record, this is the first thing he's done that hasn't been good. That's pretty impressive. And honestly, the film isn't awful. It does have some dramatic scenes, mostly from Harrison Ford. It is visually stunning. It does keep just enough bullet points to the story that I can say it's faithful enough. Again, just based on what I've heard. I think this was just a major miscalculation. It either had to be live action with a real dog, or the entire thing had to be animated. And either way, the story had to be a lot harsher. I'm not sure why they took this Andy Serkis motion capture approach. Maybe they thought the technology was caught up by then? And for all I know, maybe it is, but they clearly didn't have the budget or the time to bring that technology to this movie. So, as a guy who really likes dogs, Jack London, and Chris Sanders, this was kind of a triple disappointment. But I will say, the effort is there. There's never any point where I was like, oh my god, they're not trying, or they're slacking off, or whatever. I think they were trying to be faithful to the story with the limitations they had, trying to break new technological ground, again with what they had, and make their main character as expressive as possible. This just wasn't the right way. I'll give this film thanks, it does make me want to read a lot more Jack London stories, but this was simply a misstep that didn't pan out. For years, people have been asking me to do a Nostalgia Critic review of my favorite Martian. I'll admit I didn't grow up with the show, so I won't be able to do a fair comparison between the two. But I don't know if people recommending it to me necessarily saw the show either. They just want me to talk about it because they saw it as, well, easily mockable, I guess. But I figured do a Disneycember review first because I didn't really know much about the movie or if it was extremely hated or beloved or whatever. So, after years of being requested, here's what I thought about it. It's fine. I mean, it's Christopher Lloyd and Jeff Daniels in a film called My Favorite Martian. What were you expecting? I remember when I saw the trailers, I was just thinking to myself, oh, that looks like a little special effects comedy for the whole family. Cute. And that's exactly what I got. Is this known for being really bad? I mean, okay, don't get me wrong, this isn't a great comedy. But it's on par with, say, a decent Disney Channel movie. Family-friendly entertainment that makes it very clear what you're going to get. Jeff Daniels plays a reporter, sorta. He's more of a behind-the-scenes guy, giving, literally line for line, everything the real reporter, Elizabeth Hurley, is supposed to say on camera because she's good-looking and the daughter of the person that owns the station. But things go wrong when he accidentally leaves the mic on and she says things she wasn't supposed to live on TV. I have to admit, I found this idea pretty funny. He's immediately fired, and coincidentally on the same day, a Martian lands, played by Christopher Lloyd. He immediately makes a connection with Daniels, and Daniels sees him as his ticket back to his old job. He tries to befriend him, get some footage of him, learn how his weird ways work, so that he can have the story of the century. Naturally, as these stories go, an evil bad scientist is on the lookout for the Martian and is trying to capture him. The Martian, of course, though, can do all sorts of incredible things, like turn into other people, manipulate his size, lift people into the air. Even his suit, played by Wayne Knight, has its own personality and knack for getting into trouble. And that's really about it. There are no surprises, no twists, not even that much of an arc for the characters. I remember there's the scene where Jeff Daniels is talking about what a close friendship he's formed with the Martian, and the Martian returns that friendship, and I'm just thinking, no you didn't. All you did was do a bunch of wacky and wild stuff and laughed every once in a while, and suddenly, BFFs, sure. But with that said, the wacky visual jokes honestly aren't that bad and are kinda creative. There's an entire chase sequence with the car shrinking down and going into the pipes in the sewer, and they're being chased by a rotor-rooter. It's ridiculous, but it's kind of imaginative. Even when the joke looks like it's gonna be really lame, like they pop up in a toilet and here's this guy taking his pants off and oh no, but suddenly it grows back to regular size and look at this. This is like the craziest thing I've ever seen. The movie is filled with visual gags like this, and at the heart of it are these actors that are essentially complimenting those visual gags. They're all big and over the top, but it kinda looks like they're having fun too. Anytime the Martian takes on the identity of someone else and the actor or actress has to impersonate Christopher Lloyd as an alien trying to figure out how our human ways work, it's an old bit, but it's a charming old bit. It's like something I'd see out of Third Rock from the Sun. The best lines, bizarrely, go to the Martian's suit. He sees a woman trying on a dress and he talks about how hot she is. Oh, not the woman, the dress. In fact, later he reads a Victoria's Secret catalog just for the underwear. When he says he's had a rough day and he needs a drink, he takes a shot at Downey. This is funny. But I will say, it's all this type of humor. It's the visual jokes, it's the puns, it's the wacky situations where there's a lot of chasing and people flying around and slapstick, and if that's not your thing, this movie's not gonna do it for you. And even if it is, I argue this movie does it just well enough. I mean, the best slapstick to me is Great Rays, Faulty Towers, even the Evil Dead movies. But one of the reasons I think those films work so well is that there's usually a jerk at the center of it, and this movie doesn't really have that many jerks. Yeah, Wally Shawn gets a few laughs at the scientists, and yeah, Elizabeth Hurley is pretty funny. But aside from that, it's mostly friendly, albeit eccentric characters. I don't know, maybe because I just got done seeing the movie Bedtime Stories for Disneycember, and that one didn't have many laughs in it. But this I felt was satisfyingly zany. It's a standard kind of zany, but one that put a big enough smile on my face. It's kind of like a cute Animaniacs short, and that's not surprising, it's from two of the writers of Animaniacs. Do I love it? No. Would I see it again? If I was flipping through channels or somebody had it on, I'd probably give it another viewing. So I'm sorry to disappoint all the people that wanted to see me rip it to shreds, but I honestly think it's alright. Nothing phenomenal, but just the adequate amount of goofy. Christmas, everyone! In honor of this, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite Christmas specials of all time, not just from Disney, but just in general, Mickey's Christmas Carol. I know for a lot of you, the Muppets was your introduction to this classic story. Well, for me, it was Mickey Mouse. And honestly, for the short amount of time that it has, it's a very well done rendition. At a mere 45 minutes, they have to squeeze in a lot of character, a lot of story, a lot of visuals, and it, for the most part, works out pretty well. I think most of you know the story, but just in case. Ebenezer Scrooge, played by probably the most fitting casting of all time, Scrooge McDuck, is a bitter old man who hates people but loves money. One night, everything changes though when his old partner, Jacob Marley, played this time by Goofy, warns him that if he doesn't change his ways, he'll be roaming the afterlife in nothing but chains. He's visited by 3 ghosts, and they show him the visions of the past, present, and future, focusing mainly on the treatment of his employee, Bob Cratchit, played by Mickey Mouse. The short is pretty much by the numbers, they don't really change up that much, but what they do show is done very effectively. For a TV production, the animation is really stellar. Keep in mind, this is back in the 80s, there wasn't any CG, and Disney wasn't exactly in the best spot financially. So for a TV production to have this kind of movement, this kind of music, this kind of color, it really is impressive. If I'm right, I think it's also the last time you'll hear the original voice actor of Donald Duck ever do that voice. It is a shame, I feel like they never got a replacement that was good enough. There really was something just so unique about the way he would say things. The replacements aren't bad, but you can't beat the original. Much like the best Christmas carols, they really balance out the humor and joy with the darkness and depression that a story like this brings. When it needs to be funny, it is legit funny. It even opens up with a really funny line about the passing of Marley.
In his will, he left me enough money to pay for his tombstone, and I had him buried at sea.
What an asshole. But when it needs to go dark, it goes dark, man. They make Tiny Tim super cute in this, and when you have to cut to what happens to him in the future, you will believe a mouse can cry. It is grim. There's also a scene that scared the shit out of me as a kid where Scrooge's coffin opens up, revealing fire like hell is waiting for him. Good God! If I had to point to any problems with it, I would say there are 2 major ones. The main one being, it's way too short. Don't get me wrong, a lot of Christmas carols have done their stories in a half hour or so, but for the tone and emotional impact it was trying to get across, it really did need an hour and a half. After we're introduced to Tiny Tim, we cut immediately to the Ghost of Christmas Future. That's a big leap. Don't get me wrong, they condense a lot of it very cleverly and very nicely, but just imagining what they could have done with other scenes from the story and with other characters, it does kind of feel like a missed opportunity. And along with the length, it really should have been a musical. This seems tailor-made for great music. In fact, there's a wonderful song that starts off, and it's really catchy, and I listen to it every Christmas. If we had 3 or 4 more songs like that utilized throughout the special, telling the story and giving us an idea what the characters are feeling, I really feel like this could be a 10 out of 10 Christmas carol. But as is, I still really like it. I feel like the makers of this were probably given a lot of limitations, like you have to use these characters and it has to be under this time limit, and that can't be easy. But they pulled it off really well. It's very touching, it's very funny, it's very dark, it's very hopeful and optimistic. If you have a little kid, I really recommend showing it to them. It's a great introduction to the story. Yeah, Muppets is good too, there's no problem with that, but this one's always gonna hold a special place for me. And honestly, even if you don't have little kids, still check it out. It's really well done and has a lot of artistry and good acting, and I think it's getting more and more attention over the years, but it still deserves even more. Check it out and have oh what a very merry Christmas day. It's Johnny Tsunami, the Disney Channel original movie that got a lot of requests, and well, I hope you like the movie Airborne because it's pretty much the exact same story. Hell, even Airborne wasn't exactly that original a story. It's another fish out of water tale about a surfer dude who goes to a really cold place and he doesn't fit in, and if you know what I thought of Airborne, you'd probably guess I don't like this very much, and well, yeah, parts of it aren't very good, but this movie's actually much better than it has any right to be. A lot of that comes down to the acting, the directing, and where they choose to focus the majority of the drama. But we still gotta deal with that bullshit story that, yeah, we sucked in Airborne and still sucks here. In Hawaii, there's a famous surfer named Johnny Tsunami, who got that name because he apparently saved a bunch of people on a beach once. His grandson, also named Johnny, wants to follow in his footsteps, but his father gets a job somewhere else, somewhere far, far away in a totally different climate, where naturally he can't surf. Wouldn't you know it, his school uniform arrives late too, and oh no! How's he gonna fit in wearing that? Like clockwork, bullies start to pick on him, and one girl feels sad, so she starts to show him a little sympathy, and he tries to find an outlet similar to surfing, and he discovers snowboarding. But there's a problem. The people at his school only ski, and people at other schools snowboard, so, you know, he can't snowboard. But this brave Capulet decides to snowboard with the Montagues, forming a friendship with a kid named Sam, eventually gets good enough to wear the cool hat, which looks awful on him. But the pompous bullies say he shouldn't be snowboarding, and gasp, is he on the side of the mountain where snowboarders don't belong? Well, only a race that'll decide the future of who gets to go where on the mountain will decide all this. You know, erase all rivalries that have apparently been going on for years here, even the principal of the school is a part of. Yeah, when this scene in particular happened, I was dumbfounded. This writing is terrible. Like, insultingly so at times. But, much to my surprise, the film does have a lot of charm and a lot of heart. Most of that coming from, I really like these characters, and surprisingly believe the emotions they're going through. With the exception of the bully, which, yeah, I don't know who could save this role. Everyone is doing their damnedest to make these roles identifiable. Johnny has trouble fitting in, but he's not a crybaby. He's not a blowhard, he's not a jerk, he's not a whiner, he's actually a pretty balanced kid, and when something doesn't go right, I feel like he takes it the best way any kid could. The supporting cast are the same. His father doesn't like him surfing because it reminds him so much of his grandfather, who he sees as a beach bum, and again, this could so easily be an over-domineering, jerky character, but you kind of feel for this dude and saw he never quite made that connection with his father, and he's seeing it happen again in his son, and he's concerned and confused, and even the dialogue written for the mother is either very nagging or very stereotypical supportive wife, but when she talks, you feel her concern and knowledge that she knows how to make things better. What shocked me the most is the guy who played Johnny Tsunami. You've seen him before, Kari Hiroyuki Tagawa, hopefully I said that right. He was the bad guy in Mortal Kombat and Elektra, and he always plays the villains, and he plays them great, but it's always the role he's cast in, so when I saw he was supposed to be the wild and wacky grandfather, I was like, oh man, this isn't gonna work, but I absolutely love this guy. I love how laid back he is, but he seems to take the important things seriously. I like how funny he is, how patient he is, even his dorky laugh. He really plays it like a dude who has things figured out and is letting other people figure things out. He's just slightly guiding them whenever he feels like he can. Which isn't often because everyone should take their own journey, but when he does, he makes it count. What the film focuses on is also very refreshing. Many of these movies focus on how mean the bullies are, or how whiny the main character is, or how lovely the girlfriend is, or how wacky the best friend is, or all the crazy slapstick, you know the drill. But this movie keeps us on what's actually interesting. The kid trying to find his way, the falling out between the father and the grandfather, even learning the difference between surfing and snowboarding. Yeah, they actually do show you some of the techniques, and it isn't just a montage and he's perfect, you do see him slip and fall and try to get better. With that said, you do still have to hit those stupid bullet points that a lot of these Disney Channel sports movies hit, and yeah, they are lame, but they fly by pretty fast. Most of it is just allowing these good actors to be good actors. And in a lot of these Disney Channel movies that are supposed to be about growing up, I think that's enough. I really feel like the important moments that would help kids figure stuff out is given the proper amount of attention. So, would I recommend it? Sure, for the Disney Channel movie crowd, you know, sort of the younger kids and maybe a few teens. I don't know how many adults would get that into it, but it's not difficult for an adult to sit through either. It knew what it wanted to do and it achieved it adequately well. Grab a snowboard or a surfboard and take the surprisingly decent ride. probably seen my review of the remake of That Darn Cat with Brad Jones, but what about my thoughts of the original? I saw this movie on the Disney Channel years ago when I was just a little kid, and I remember really liking it. How does it hold up now that I'm an adult? I actually kind of like it even more. I think you could just title this film Character Actors, the movie, both in a comedic way and a dramatic way. Every person in this movie feels like a side character from a completely different film. You know how sometimes when I review a movie I'm like, oh man, I wish this movie was about that side character, they'd be more interesting. Well, this is that flick. Everyone is either charming, diabolical, strong, vulnerable, goofy, serious, and it all ties around a scenario that's so ridiculous it's kind of impossible not to enjoy. DC is a Siamese cat that likes to go roaming in the streets. As you'd imagine, he gets into all sorts of trouble, but he also sees all sorts of trouble. He comes across two thugs who just got done with a bank robbery and they took a hostage. While they're trying to figure out what to do with her, she puts a message of help onto DC's collar. His owner, played by Haley Mills, sees the message and cleverly puts together it might be from the kidnapped banker. She goes to the FBI and comes across an agent, played by Dean Jones, who's assigned to the case, and the only thing he can put together is if they follow the cat, never letting on that he's being followed, he might lead them to the kidnappers. As you'd imagine, all sorts of colorful characters get involved, including Canoe, maybe one of the funniest boyfriends in film history. His name is Canoe, for God's sake, how can you not laugh at that? Rowdy McDowell as a pissed-off neighbor, Edwin as a jeweler, a couple of snoopy neighbors, and of course, a cat with a lot of personality. This feline is a damn good actor. Even though it's a Disney film and it would have been so easy if they made this cat talk or give him an inner monologue or something, it's totally not needed. The look on his face and the way he moves is perfect. You can already figure out what's going through his mind. And just how crazy all these people following him are. Yet for all the film's silliness, somebody forgot to tell the crooks in this movie that this was a comedy. They play these roles dead serious. One is a little bit more goofy, but you can still tell is a psychotic, like when he's getting ready to dispose of a body singing "It's Unloading Time." And the other is so domineering with no nonsense, he is terrifying. Even the hostage plays it 100% straight. She looks terrified and she's constantly trying to think, how do I get out of this with my life? This adds not only to the urgency, but in great contrast to all the goofy stuff that happens. If this movie was done with any other actors, I don't think it would have worked. I think it would have been too boring or silly, but they really pull it off. All of them do a spectacular job. If I did have one problem with the movie, is that the director was the same guy who did Mary Poppins and Bedknobs and Broomsticks, a lot of these big Disney films. As such, those films are very long and they fly by very quickly. This does drag a little bit. Every time I watch it, I think, oh, this is the time where they're gonna come across the kidnappers, and no, it's the next time. There's just a few too many times they have to follow DC around. I honestly think twice would have been enough. They had to at least cut one of the times they went out following the cat. But with that said, this movie's a ton of fun. When I reviewed the remake, I was shocked how many people were saying they didn't know this was a remake. They didn't know there was an original, and that is such a tragedy. The movie is so original and so charming, and yeah, sometimes can be a little too goofy, but when you mix it with the crime thriller they're filming at the same time, that's part of what makes it so unique. The contrast surprisingly keeps you invested. So if you think the crappy Christina Ricci one is the only one out there, I'm happy to say there's a real gem waiting for you. When the Muppets premiered on ABC in 2015, people just ripped it apart. Which is surprising because there's a lot of hype around this show, and the jokes looked really funny, and the gimmick, which even they acknowledge is the gimmick, was familiar but worked in other avenues. You know, the idea of it looking like a documentary with a camera crew following them around and having a little bit of the shaky cam and interviews, stuff like that. But that has worked tremendously well in shows like The Office and Parks and Rec. When it came out though, for whatever reason, I never saw any episodes. I don't know if I was just busy when it was on or kept missing the times, but most people had the same general reaction. It just wasn't the Muppets. It was too mean, a lot of people said. There was no joy, no soul, no heart. So, after sitting down and finally watching all the episodes of just this one season series, are they right? it's complicated. The initial idea behind the show is kind of like what the Muppet shows have been in the past, where all the Muppets are putting on this big TV show. Unlike before, where it was a variety show, now it's Miss Piggy's talk show. Miss Piggy's the star, Fozzie's the co-host, Kermit's the producer, and all the other Muppets have, of course, a bunch of crazy jobs as writers, producers, gophers, literal gophers sometimes, all that good stuff. At the center, as usual, is Kermit trying to keep balance among the chaos. I mean, with Miss Piggy more the star of the show now than ever before, she of course acts even more like a prima donna than in previous shows. As you'd imagine, a bunch of celebrities show up as guests, a whole bunch of things go wrong that everybody has to either scramble to fix or end up embarrassing themselves on live TV. On paper, it's actually not that different from the other Muppet shows. But in writing and production, you can see where the problems kind of arise. And I do mean kinda, cause it gets a little complicated as it goes along. You'll see what I mean. The thing is, from beginning to end, the show was funny. This is good writing, clever, ingenious writing. The writers of the show know what's gonna sound humorous out of the Muppets' mouths. Hearing the optimistic and often upbeat Kermit say my life is a bacon-soaked hell is pretty comical. Hearing the Blue Eagle as the censor say all the things you can't say and do on television is also a lot of fun. Fozzie saying he joined a dating site for bears and it wasn't exactly what he had in mind is just ingenious. I'm sorry, that is friggin' ingenious. But yeah, what about the criticisms that the show is just too mean? Well, for a lot of the characters I don't mind too much. I mean, Miss Piggy is kind of a mean character and the Muppets are all kind of self-absorbed. It almost makes sense, except for one character. The idea of Kermit is that he is always trying to keep things together. He's always trying to look on the bright side. He's always trying to find the silver lining, and then, usually at some point, he'll crack. And then he'll realize the error of his ways and apologize, and all the Muppets are like, oh, it's okay, we love you, and you know how it goes. He always tries to find the cheerful route, even if he doesn't quite make it. But for the first half of this show, he doesn't even attempt to find the cheerful route. He'll just straight up say if a routine sucks, or the writing isn't that good, or somebody acted terrible, or manipulate the crew but not in a way where he felt like he had to do it and he feels kind of bad. No, he's like giggling to himself like, hey, I got away with murder. Not only did it not feel right, it ruined the dynamic of what held the Muppets together. Kermit was the focus. He was the ethical center, and here it's just kind of thrown out the window. Oh, and Kermit and Piggy are broken up. And no, not like they break up for one episode and get back together. I mean, through the majority of the series, they're not together. And it's awkward and manipulative and not super funny, just more, you guessed it, mean. And despite a lot of the episodes still getting laughs, this did distractingly carry through. That is, until halfway through the series. Yeah, there's suddenly this episode where the studio president comes down and says the show is too mean, there's not enough joy, there's too much talking, not enough sketches, fix it. Sure enough, from that point on, the show does get a little nicer, and there are a few more sketches thrown in there, and Piggy and Kermit start to act a little nicer towards each other, and there's even a scene where they're trying to think of ideas and they just start humming the Muppet Show with their little, office supplies and mugs and paper clips and stuff, and Kermit says, this is what was missing. Joy. Clearly, something happened here. Even in the intro where Kermit can't get any donuts or coffee and there's nothing left for him, and he's like, okay, let's start the show. They changed that to have it where Miss Piggy brings him a coffee. Okay, come on, we don't need that much. Yeah, it's not a 100% change. I mean, the characters are still pretty similar, but they just didn't seem as harsh. And on top of that, the writing was still funny. At its core, I still liked watching these characters interact off each other. So alright, it's kind of a mixed bag, but in general, would I recommend it? As long as you keep in mind it is gonna get a little nicer and have more heart as it goes on, yeah, I would. It's still really funny, and even though the characters aren't always 100% on point, they're close enough. I don't think it's quite the insult that everybody thinks it is. I think it's just a show trying to find its footing, and halfway through, it does. Since part of my job is watching all these episodes, I can say it was worth it. Is it phenomenal? No, but I think it is worth your time, especially if you're a Muppets fan. It starts off on shaky ground, but so do a lot of shows. And like a lot of shows, this one does get better. And it doesn't just wait until season 2 or 3 or 4, it does it in the first season. If you have Disney+, give it a watch. Yeah, it can be mean, but it's got enough laughs to make it worth your while. not sure what really persuaded me to see Ruby Bridges. I was looking through Disney Plus, saw it was a Disney Channel movie, and the first thing I thought was, oh god, Disney Channel's gonna try this? The same people that brought us Can of Worms, Xenon, and High School Musical? But it was middle of January, I just got back from a vacation, I thought, why not? Let's give it a chance, maybe Disney will do this one pretty well. And I'm telling you, with all seriousness, this movie is fucking great. Like, it's not just a good Disney Channel movie, it's a good movie, period. I was blown away how well they handled this. The first thing that came in my head was, oh, we're gonna see her just mostly being a normal kid, maybe throwing a few one-liners like they usually do in Disney Channel movies, and maybe either halfway or maybe at the end they'll show her going into the school and people are yelling at her and everything. Because, come on, it's Disney Channel. They're not going to do anything that heavy. I mean, even that Color of Friendship movie, I mean, mostly it just shows them hanging out and having fun, and that's the idea. Kids are supposed to like them before we feel really bad for them. But this movie leaps right into it, but not too fast either. The story, as I'm sure most of you who know history know, is about the first black girl integrated into a white school in New Orleans. The film opens with the proposal being made to the family, but it doesn't just jump to her going to school yet. It shows what this family is like, what she's like, what her interests are, how everybody looks at them, and how they get along pretty well in the neighborhood. And they're chill and cool and likable, and everybody is relatable and stands out. When she is finally allowed into the school though, well, you know what happens. There's protests, people screaming, everybody saying she doesn't belong here. And if you're like me, that's about all you know. That's what they tell you in the history books. There's that Norman Rockwell painting. Oh man, what a terrible point in our history for everyone to act so mean, but I never really asked how the rest of the year went. How did Ruby cope? How did her family cope? How did the teachers cope? Was the school understanding? Did they stand by her, or did they have some arguments too? The entire movie is about how everybody is affected. Some teachers are okay with her entering the school, others don't know how to feel, and others are die-hard against it. But they're also very clever at showing that they kinda disguise it sometimes. Like they say Ruby has to be in her own classroom, and they're like, well, isn't that against the idea? And one of them says it's for her own safety. Now, is that a real concern, or does she just want to keep them separate? Both these educators seem to walk that fine line of what's safe and what's right, with Ruby's main teacher leaning towards what's right and being very kind and welcoming. The other one leaning much more towards what's safe, and yeah, you could easily see some racist over every tone in there, but they kind of play around with that too. You can tell she's kind of convincing herself that this is the right thing to do or isn't the right thing to do, and by the end when you see her looking at Ruby and she has tears in her eyes, you don't know, is she sad because Ruby is so inspiring, or is she sad because she lost? She's still gonna be in that school and other black people are gonna be coming as well. A friggin' Disney Channel movie is leaving that vague, it's not hammering it in. There's another great moment where Ruby is doing these drawings and a doctor who wants to help them with the transition, played by Kevin Pollak, notices she draws black people in kind of a weird deformed way and white people in a normal way. Like she sees them and herself as ugly, but there's another layer to it. She draws herself with no mouth. She draws her friend with no ears. And I immediately thought to myself, is she drawing him that way because it's like she has no voice and then the friend has no ears because she's not listening? They never come out and say that, but you can interpret it that way. The movie is that smart. The parents in this movie are also incredible. The mother wants to see all this injustice done to black people stop, and the father, yeah, he wants to see it too, but not at the sacrifice of his daughter. Not at the sacrifice of his job, not at the sacrifice of his friends, not at the sacrifice of his family's mental health. And he's not bad, like, oh, how can he not see how this will help things in the long run? No, he does see. That's why he goes through with it. He just hates seeing his daughter suffer and his family suffer. And the arguments they have feel real, and the fact that they show this entire year and what they went through and all the time she has to walk through that crowd every day and all the little bits of suffering building up, you really recognize what a sacrifice this is. Because of this, when it gets to the scenes that could be interpreted as a little corny, like her turning around and praying for the protesters or one or two speeches that some of the teachers give, it doesn't feel forced. There was a moment that really caught me off guard in the way they used the N-word. Again, Disney Channel movie, you don't think they're gonna say that. But they're brilliant at slowly working it in to the point where it's the most effective. First, you see people mouthing it, but you can't really hear it, there's just too many people screaming. Then, you see it slightly written, but it's never fully spelled out. And then suddenly, when Ruby is allowed with the other kids, this one boy just says it. It caught me completely off guard. Holy shit, that little boy just said that word like it was nothing. And this poor kid had to just sit there and take it because if she fought back, she'd be seen as difficult and it could screw everything up. The way the film slowly introduced that word to ultimately the most shocking point possible is friggin' ingenious. If you heard all the protesters saying it, yeah, it'd be shocking at first, but you know, and that's what you expect in a movie like this. But the fact that they saved it, they built it up, and it's a little boy who obviously doesn't even know the weight of that word saying it, it's hugely effective. If I had one gripe with the movie, I'd say it's probably the music. Where everything else is elevated to like a great, fantastic movie, the music is still Disney Channel music. It's corny, there's a lot of piano, it kind of sounds like something you hear on Full House, but what do you expect? It's a composer, I'm sure, just doing what they normally do for a Disney Channel movie. It's not like they have a grand orchestra waiting for them. But even that's utilized very cleverly because there's not a ton of music. The movie has a lot of quiet moments, a lot of scenes of just people talking. And I don't think it's in a way that kids would find really boring because the main character is Ruby. It's kind of like Fly the Navigator. Yeah, there's a lot of talking in that, but it's mostly from the point of view of the boy and him being concerned. You want to know if he's going to turn out okay. It's the same thing here. Most of it is still from Ruby's point of view. And I don't care who you are, if you're a little kid that has to go to school every day with people screaming at you, you're gonna want to hope that kid's okay. So yeah, I used to say my favorite Disney Channel movie was probably Smart House or Luck of the Irish or one of those that was based on a popular TV show. But nah, man, hands down, it's this one. It's wonderfully written, wonderfully directed, wonderfully acted. I couldn't believe how enthralled I was by a Disney Channel movie that's based on a true story. A true story about prejudice. I feel like Disney is talking about this over and over recently. It's getting so tiring, there's nothing that new to it. But this gets it right. And it doesn't feel preachy, it doesn't feel like it's talking down to you. It just gives it to you straight, and it does a fantastic job doing it. I can't recommend this movie more, man. It shocked the hell out of me how good it was. If you haven't seen it, check it out and see what you've been missing. Well, can't do one without the other. It's Zombies 2, and where the first one was actually a little bit of a surprise, not really anything great, but it had some good laughs and some fun song sequences. This one is basically what I thought the first one was going to be. I guess I can't get too mad. I mean, what? It's Zombies the Musical 2 on the Disney Channel. Should I really have expected that much? Well, after the first one, maybe. I mean, you actually kind of delivered on the first film in its own strange way, and this weirdly is a little bit insulting. Says the grown man, arguing about Zombies the Musical 2. Oh, let's just get to it. While zombies are being more and more accepted in school, except when they're not, randomly decides they're outcasts when the plot demands it, we're suddenly shown that werewolves exist. Huh, forgot to bring that up in the last film. The zombie, we're talking about zombies. Oh, by the way, these werewolves, but you know, they don't really matter right now. You know what, it's something new, and I like werewolves. I want to see what they do with this. But doesn't matter because you know what they're gonna do with it. They're gonna do the exact same thing they did with the zombies. Everybody has a prejudice against the werewolves. So the werewolves, of course, have a prejudice against everyone. However, they're moonstone necklaces that keep them alive that gets its power source from one main moonstone. Yeah, this is surprisingly kind of a complicated plot. Is possibly about to be destroyed, and so they have to find the prophesized, I think, alpha wolf who's gonna make everything right. And, well, seeing how they have white hair and one of the main characters has white hair, can you guess who it's gonna be? Even though she was born with white hair and is wondering the first film why she has it, she never puts together maybe she's a werewolf, even though all of them clearly have white hair. So the wolves try to work their way into the high school and they're accepted at first, though of course they're seen as monsters, but that's okay, the zombies are kind of fighting for them, even though they kind of see them as monsters too, but one of them's running for president, so he needs student votes and the werewolves count, even though he was just pointing at them screaming and running away. If this was the first film, it'd be really funny, but no, it's trying to teach you something, and it's doing a pretty bad job at it. Though there is a legit surprise with the connection the main character has with the werewolves, it doesn't really matter. And I say that because nobody in this movie acts like anything really matters. This feels like a sequel that's coming off of a surprise hit. A film the studio hoped would do well, but then did incredibly well, so they rushed out the second one as fast as they could. Meaning the characters, acting, story, and even the song sequences just don't have any reason for existing. And everybody kinda gives off that attitude. Look at this scene, for example, at the prom. Listen to this dialogue, hear how they're saying it. Tell me if this sounds like a movie people are passionate about, or a satire of this kind of movie that you would see a character from Gravity Falls watching.
I had no right to take your necklace to stop you from becoming a werewolf.
I thought everything would make sense if I was a werewolf, but I'm not. And I don't even know if I'm a cheerleader.
You're a leader, Addison.
Kids, I can't find the remote and I refuse to stand up.
Yeah, it's that kind of flick. Even the lead-ins to the songs rarely make sense. And I know, it's not like the first film was this Les Mis type musical where the songs really tied into the storytelling, but they worked in the context of what it was. In this one, when the idea of Addison being a werewolf is finally introduced to her, you think the song will be kinda like this revelation, something slow, something big, something powerful. But no, it's a fun little dance routine that doesn't match at all.
I see a real community. Unique, but you have unity. You know who you're supposed to be.
There's another scene where the wolves are breaking in to try and get the moonstone and they're stopped by security, and then suddenly they start singing and dancing. This doesn't match. Even the big finish is so anticlimactic and so little happens in it that they basically have no segue into the song. It just kind of cuts to it.
Banto's got an ear for languages.
We are all different, baby.
There's one moment where Addison turns to the camera and says something to the audience. I actually had to remind myself they did that in this movie. There was so not a clear tone. There's another scene where we find out Zed sabotages Addison, like he's taking control of her life, he's doing something terrible, but then he just goes into this rap battle like it's nothing, and he kind of seems like a douche, and not like a, oh, he just doesn't get it kind of douche, like a legit douche. There's no remorse in this scene. Maybe if he looked a little bad, like, yeah, he's trying to do this debate, but his mind is on something else, but no, he's just an a-hole. Though granted, I can't take this far more seriously than other debates I've seen. All the characters are cutouts, which, okay, that's kind of what they were in the first film, but they were having fun with it. They were consistent cutouts, and they had a few funny lines here and there. This one, their motivations flip-flop depending on what song is coming up next, and even then, they don't always match. So, okay, you must think I really don't like this movie, and yeah, I don't, but I will say I've seen a lot worse. I think about movies like Maleficent 2 and Society of Secondborns and a bunch of other crap that take itself way too seriously, and to this film's credit, it really doesn't take itself seriously. It knows it's mindless fluff, which is fine, the first one knew that too, it just had fun with it. This one's not any fun. I give credit they're not waving their finger at us as much as other Disney properties have lately, but they're not really replacing it with anything of much value either. It just feels rushed, unnecessary and rushed. Every moment it exists, you know why it was made, to make money. And yeah, a lot of Disney films are like that, but if they're good, they can trick us and they can really suck us in and give us something really fun. This one doesn't do that, at least for me. Again, I guess it seems kinda silly to get angry that Zombies the Musical 2 wasn't that good. I guess I just get a little ticked off when something legit surprises me, like doesn't blow me away, just surprises me when I thought it was gonna be awful, and then the follow-up gives me the awful that the first one was promising. I know it's not gonna be a big shock, but Zombies 2, you can probably skip. Let's wrap up this year's Disneycember with Soul. This was another one of those movies that was supposed to be released on the big screen, but then the pandemic happened, so now it's released on Disney Plus on Christmas Day. And I think the most appropriate way to start off this review is by saying, Pixar, it's good to have you back. I'm sure you had a movie about Jessie retiring or the monster starting an accounting firm, but man, does this feel like a return to form. It has the emotion, it has the creative ideas, it has great acting, it has phenomenal animation, and all of them feed into each other. It's not like, oh, everything was okay, but the animation was really good, or oh, the acting was good, but the story was a little off. No, everything feels right. It has the vibe that not only did it take a long time to put this together, but everyone legitimately wanted to work on it. A combination of passion, talent, and fresh ideas. We start off with a music teacher named Joe, played by Jamie Foxx. He's not exactly thrilled with this job, but it pays the bills. However, a giant opportunity has opened up to him. One of his former students tells him that he can be a pianist for one of the best jazz musicians out there. His family, however, doesn't like the idea of him taking a chance on such a risky profession. I mean, being an entertainer is not always the most stable job. All of this kinda doesn't matter though, because Joe suddenly dies. His soul is supposed to go to the great beyond, but he escapes and lands in the great before. That is to say, where souls are developed before they're put into human beings. The people in charge mistake Joe for a mentor, so he's assigned to number 22, played by Tina Fey. 22 is their most difficult soul because she doesn't want to be alive, so she does everything she can to sabotage her chances of going to Earth. Joe makes a deal with her that if she can get him to Earth, he'll rig it so that she never has to go. Along the way, of course, they come across all sorts of weird places and colorful characters and crazy shenanigans and maybe discover the meaning of life. No spoilers yet. The vibe most people get out of this is Inside Out meets Coco, and yeah, I think that's fair. This director has a talent of taking stories that honestly have been done before, but adding kind of a new spin to it with Monsters, Inc. I've seen this before, where the monsters are kind of in this office setting and they go under beds and closets and stuff, but had an imaginative, childlike lean. The idea of humanized emotions controlling people has also been done before, actually by Disney too, but he struck a balance of something for both kids and adults. Now we have another idea that I'm sure has been done before, but this time it's leaning mostly towards adults. That is to say, kids can watch it, and yeah, there's some little hyper cutesy jokes here and there, but this mostly has an adult lean. Think about it, it's about a soul who doesn't want to die and another soul who doesn't want to live. There's a lot you can read into this. And the places they go so easily tie into what people are going through, or have gone through, or are going to go through. It's probably the most layered Pixar movie since Inside Out. And for the most part, it really, really works. The parts that don't, I'll admit, are a bit more of a personal preference, but I'll get to that in a bit. I really want to talk about the stuff that's great in this first. First of all, look at it. This might be Pixar's best looking movie. I mean, it almost looks like you're just looking at the real world. There just happens to be Pixar characters in it. But even the Pixar characters have these incredible textures and lighting, and it just leaps off the screen. I didn't even see it on the big screen. I saw it on my little TV, and it still looked amazing. I also like the distinct contrast between the real world and the afterworld. The afterworld is a lot more simple, but it doesn't mean it's lazy. Look at these designs. I love the way they combine 2D and 3D together. I mean, they're just amazing. So much thought clearly went into how are they going to make these two universes look different and stand out, and they really succeed. The acting is also top-notch. Jamie Foxx finds that perfect balance between being sincere but also frustrated. He's trying to be patient, he's trying to hold everything together, but he's still not satisfied. And it's finally starting to get to him, especially when it looks like he had his chance to finally be satisfied. His transition from being so goal-based to finding out what really matters happens so naturally, and what I really like is it doesn't take a lot of words. Yes, there is a scene where he has a big speech talking to his mother, and that's great, he does it wonderfully. But he also knows how to make the shorter lines work and just let the animation take over. There's several amazing scenes where he has to play the piano and it's like he's transported somewhere else, and I feel like that wouldn't have worked as effectively if his performance wasn't so solid, and I felt like I really had an idea what this guy was about. Tina Fey also does an amazing job. I didn't even know she was in this movie. I was just watching this character and sometimes thinking, I wonder who's voicing that, but after a while, I didn't care. I was just so getting into her story. What I really like about her performance is that she captures what it's like to kind of be this bratty, frustrated, kid-like character, but she doesn't do a kid voice. It's still clearly a grown woman's voice, but the way she talks and the inflections and the attitude all have the feel of a little kid. I feel like both these characters so easily could have been done wrong and could have been too frustrating, but they really perfect that balance. You understand and relate to what they want, even if what they want seems incredibly different from the other. But okay, there are some things I said were kind of a personal preference thing, and I really stand by that. This is a 4 out of 4 wonderful movie, one of Pixar's best in years. Honestly, there's only 2 things that didn't quite sit well with me, and I'm just gonna say right now, it goes into spoilers. So if you don't want to hear about what happens in the movie, go to this point. I'll even give you a few seconds so it's not ruined for you. Oh, also heads up, don't check the comments, they're gonna ruin it for you too, so don't scroll down if you really don't want to know how it ends. I'm still giving you the few seconds. Alright, here we go, I'm gonna go into spoilers, you have fair warning. My first tiny gripe is I wish when Joe and 22 went back to Earth, it was a little funnier. I really like the idea of Joe finding these little things that he remembers liking and having them win 22 over, and I also really like that 22 is not won over by exactly the same things as him, with like music. You think she's gonna hear jazz and fall in love, but she doesn't. It's silly things like pizza and the little helicopter leaves falling from trees, silly things like that. But I feel like the comedy had to be a little more punchy. I actually had the same issue with Inside Out, but again, it didn't ruin anything for me. It's just something I felt was missing a little bit. And here's the other problem I have. Again, this is a huge spoiler. If you do not want this ruined, skip ahead. I think Joe should have died at the end. Or at the very least, become a mentor. I actually thought that's what they were building up. Remember when 22 is like, wow, you're giving up your chance to go to Earth for me? And he's like, yeah, it's worth it. And it looks like he accepts it. He closes his eyes, he smiles, he's ready to go into the great beyond. And then suddenly, just kidding, no consequences. You don't lose a thing. Start over, Frozen 2, it's all good. But here's the thing, I've talked it over with some friends and they see it a little differently than I do. They see him as discovering what the meaning of life is, what he should have been focusing on, and now he's given an opportunity to live it again. I personally saw it as he did live a good life, he just didn't know it. And then when he thought back about how good he had it, the little things like being a kid, being introduced to music, even introducing his students to some of music. Remember that one kid who grew up and said, hey, I have a gig for you? Or that one girl that actually got into playing the horn even though she said she didn't want to and suddenly did? That all ties into it. He realizes he had it good and did have a lot of happy moments, he just forgot about them, focusing too much on what he thought his purpose was. But that's another reason why this film is so great. Other people can look at it and say, no, he was wasting his life and now he's given a chance to do it again, which, I don't know, there's no other people that tried to get off that conveyor belt going to the great beyond. I mean, he was the only one? Nobody else was freaked out? This just seems a little odd. I don't know, to me the story was about accepting your end even if it is abrupt and not fair. You still had the gift of life that gave you some amazing things, even if the amazing things were small things. I'm actually really curious what you all think because I get the feeling I'm alone on this. I guess it's kind of the pros and cons of making a movie that has so many layers you can interpret it in so many ways, but do you think it should have ended with him going to the great beyond and yeah, that's life, it's unfair, but that's how it is? Or do you think he deserved that second chance? I really want to know what you think about that. But let me also make it very clear, that doesn't ruin the movie at all. Because the film does have so much dimension to it and can be talked about so much and you can get so much out of it, I don't think it even comes close to damaging it. This is still one of my top 5 favorite Pixar movies, maybe top 3. When people say Disney is the top of the game, the biggest animation studio breaking barriers, these are the kind of films I think of. These are the ones I would rate up there with Studio Ghibli. So, if you haven't put it together yet, check it out. It's an amazing, wonderful, fantastic, I'm just rambling now, go see it, it's so good. And guys, that's it for this year's Disneycember. I think everyone can agree we really needed some escapism and, well, Disney's always been pretty good about that. But through that escapism, we can also find quite a bit of realism and a lot of truths. People talk about fantasies and fairy tales and how they're not true, but they also represent what we want to be true, what we hope for. The best Disney always represents a chance, what could be. Even the impossible can sometimes become possible. When they released Snow White so many years ago, did people think something like Soul would be following after that so many years later? Something that looks like this? Or all these other films and shows and whatever? Probably not. And in a year like 2020, we do need hope, and Disney does represent that a lot of the time. Whether it's through technology, ingenuity, or just good old-fashioned imagination. They'll always be there to try and represent our fondest dreams. Thanks everybody for watching, and I look forward to doing it again next year.